My name is Quinn, and I am 34 years old. 2 days after my emergency surgical delivery, my billionaire mother-in-law marched into my hospital room. Behind her stood my husband, tightly holding the hand of his 26-year-old mistress. She threw a $33 million cashier check and a stack of legal papers onto my bleeding lap. "Take the money, sign away, my grandchildren, and disappear," she commanded. I smiled, picked up the pen and signed. By morning, her multi-billion-dollar dynasty would be completely wiped out. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you love watching arrogant people dig their own graves. The smell of hospital antiseptic usually fades into the background, but that morning it made me violently nauseous. My abdomen throbbed with a searing pain that radiated through my entire core. Leo and Lily. My newborn twins were resting in the neonatal intensive care unit down the hall. I had just survived a grueling 30-hour labor that ended in an emergency surgical delivery. The recovery room was dead quiet save for the rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor. I was alone, staring at the acoustic ceiling tiles, waiting for my husband to return with coffee and some reassurance. I was exhausted, physically drained, and emotionally vulnerable. Then the heavy wooden door burst open, slamming violently against the drywall. Catherine did not knock. At 62 years old, she owned half the commercial real estate in Chicago and walked into every room like she had purchased the building yesterday. She wore a tailored charcoal suit and a string of pearls that cost more than the first house I ever bought. Her face was set in a cold, hard mask. Right behind her was Spencer, my husband, of 4 years. He looked down at the linoleum floor, actively avoiding my eyes. He was hiding behind his mother, just like he had done his entire life. And then I saw exactly why he could not look at me. His right hand was tightly intertwined with the hand of a young blonde woman. Her name was Brittany. She was 26 years old, carrying a designer handbag, wearing stilettos in a hospital recovery ward, and smirking at me like she had just won the lottery. I recognized her immediately. She was the junior acquisitions associate at Catherine's firm, the girl Spencer claimed was just a professional mentee who needed guidance. Catherine did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask about the health of her newborn grandchildren. She walked straight to the side of my bed and dropped a thick manila folder directly onto my legs, completely disregarding my fresh surgical incision. A rectangular slip of paper slid out from the folder and landed right on my hospital gown. I looked down at it. It was a certified cashier check from a major national bank. The amount printed in bold black ink was exactly $33 million. "I want you out of this hospital, out of this city, and out of my son's life by tomorrow morning," Catherine stated, her voice as flat and unfeeling as a corporate eviction notice. "The money is yours. The twins stay with us. They carry my family name, and I will be the one who decides who raises them." I stared at the check, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of the ambush. The physical pain in my stomach was suddenly eclipsed by a cold, sharp shock. This was not a television drama. This was happening in real time in a sterile Chicago hospital room 48 hours after I brought 2 fragile lives into the world. "Sign the relinquishment papers," Catherine commanded, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the manila folder. "It is a very generous severance package, Quinn. Most women in your position get nothing but legal fees and a ruined reputation. You take the $33 million, you sign away your maternal rights, and you walk away cleanly. If you try to fight me, I will crush you. I will drag your name through every tabloid in this city. I will ensure you never work in financial technology again." I looked at Spencer. He was shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking like a scolded child hiding behind his mother's skirt. He still had not spoken a single word. He just gripped Brittany's hand tighter. "You brought your mistress to my hospital room," I said quietly, my voice raspy from exhaustion. "You brought her here while our children are in incubators down the hall fighting to grow stronger." Catherine stepped between my line of sight and Spencer. "Do not speak to my son. You address me. He has made his choice. He realized his mistake in marrying you, and we are rectifying that mistake today. The children belong to this family. You were merely the vehicle to get them here." The cruelty of her words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She was calling me a vessel, a temporary incubator, who had served her purpose and was now being paid off to vanish without a trace. I looked back down at the check. $33 million. To anyone else, it might seem an impossible fortune, a sum large enough to buy compliance and silence. But I was not just anyone. I built the secure data networks that banks use to move money just like this. I was a senior financial technology architect. I understood the architecture of wealth better than Catherine ever would. I remained silent, letting the heavy atmosphere stretch out. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not throw the check back in her face. Crying would give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Screaming would allow Catherine to paint me as hysterical. Instead, my brain went into analytical mode. I examined the routing numbers printed at the bottom of the check. I recognized the identifier immediately. This was a corporate holding account, one with highly restricted access. This was now an absolute, undeclared war. I kept my eyes locked on Catherine, refusing to blink, refusing to show a single ounce of the devastation tearing through my chest. The silence in the room became thick and oppressive, broken only by the steady mechanical beeping of the heart rate monitor beside my bed. Finally, the heavy silence became too much for Spencer to bear. He dropped Brittany's hand and took a hesitant half-step forward, looking like a cornered animal trying to explain its way out of a trap he helped build. "Quinn, I am sorry," Spencer murmured, his voice cracking with a pathetic mix of guilt and cowardice. "I really am. But you have to understand my position. Brittany can provide a traditional, untainted family environment for the kids. My mother is right. This is the best way forward for everyone. We want different things in life. You are always so obsessed with your career, always working late, always analyzing data. Brittany understands the kind of lifestyle our family needs to maintain, and she knows how to be a supportive wife." I stared at the man I had married, the man who had promised to stand by me for better or worse. He was regurgitating lines Catherine had clearly fed him beforehand. He was a weak, spineless heir who had never worked a hard day in his life, living entirely off a trust fund his mother controlled with an iron fist. He was terrified of losing his allowance, and he was perfectly willing to sell out his wife and children to keep it. Spencer swallowed hard and glanced nervously at his mother before continuing. "Mom threatened to freeze my trust fund entirely if I did not agree to this arrangement. I cannot lose my income, Quinn. You know I do not have a career like yours. I cannot survive without the family money. I have to do what she says. Brittany makes me happy, and she fits into the family structure seamlessly." At that moment, Brittany stepped forward, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She smoothed her hands over her designer dress, deliberately resting her palms against her lower abdomen. The gesture was slow, calculated, and impossible to miss. Her stomach was slightly rounded. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. She was pregnant. "That is right, Quinn," Brittany said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Spencer and I are expecting a child of our own. A true sibling for the twins. We are going to raise them all together in the main estate. They will have everything they could ever want. They will grow up surrounded by wealth, proper society connections, and a mother who actually knows how to fit in with the Chicago elite. You should take the money. It is more than someone with your background could ever hope to earn in a lifetime of typing on a computer." I suppressed the violent wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm me. My husband had not just been cheating on me while I was undergoing grueling medical treatments and a high-risk pregnancy. He had gotten his mistress pregnant while I was carrying his children. The level of betrayal was so profound, so entirely lacking in basic human decency that it bordered on the surreal. Yet I forced my face to remain a blank canvas. I channeled every ounce of my professional discipline, treating this horrific personal betrayal like a hostile corporate takeover. I refused to give them the reaction they wanted. Catherine stepped forward again, physically blocking Spencer and Brittany, eager to deliver the final verbal blows. She looked down at me with unvarnished disgust, her eyes sweeping over my pale face, my messy hair, and the sterile hospital gown. "Let us be perfectly honest with each other, Quinn." Catherine sneered, her voice echoing off the cold hospital walls. You were never one of us. You grew up in a heavily mortgaged house in the suburbs. You took out massive student loans to pay for your education. You had to work your way up the corporate ladder coding financial software like a common laborer. You have no pedigree, no society connections, and no understanding of how legacy wealth operates. You are new money, and new money is always entirely classless. She pointed a rigid finger at the custody relinquishment papers resting on my lap. I allowed Spencer to marry you because you had good genetics and a high intelligence quotient. You were a useful temporary incubator for the family bloodline. We needed healthy heirs, and you provided them. Your utility to this family has now officially expired. Brittany comes from a respectable family. She knows how to host charity galas, how to interact with board members, and how to raise children who will one day inherit billions. You would only drag them down with your working-class mentality and your desperate need to work for a living. I listened to her horrific speech, my mind processing the information with cold, sharp clarity. Catherine thought her money made her invincible. She believed that because she could buy commercial skyscrapers, she could buy human beings. She saw me as a transaction, a temporary contractor whose services were no longer required. But her arrogance was blinding her to a critical reality. She was dealing with a woman who understood the digital flow of money better than the executives at the bank she used every single day. Take the $33 million, Quinn Catherine demanded, her tone, leaving no room for negotiation. It is a phenomenal return on investment for 4 years of marriage. Sign the papers, pack your bags, and disappear. If you try to drag this into a courtroom, I will personally see to it that the judge declares you mentally unfit. I have the best lawyers in the country on retainer. I have psychiatrists ready to testify that your traumatic delivery has triggered severe postpartum psychosis. You will lose the twins and you will walk away with absolutely zero. The room fell silent again. Spencer looked at the floor. Brittany stroked her pregnant belly. Catherine glared at me, waiting for me to break, waiting for the tears, the screaming, the predictable working-class surrender she was so certain I would display. But I simply looked back at them, my mind rapidly calculating my next move. I was not going to cry, and I was certainly not going to surrender. I was going to systematically dismantle their entire empire. I would strip them of everything they valued, starting with their precious wealth and ending with their pristine public reputation. They had severely miscalculated the strength of the woman they were trying to destroy, and they would soon pay the ultimate price for their arrogance and cruelty. Do you really think I am making empty threats? Catherine leaned closer, her expensive perfume clashing violently with the sterile scent of the hospital room. Let me educate you on how the world actually operates, Quinn. The American justice system is a commodity, and I have unlimited purchasing power. If you refuse to sign those papers, I will not just fight you for custody. I will completely eradicate your existence as a functioning adult in society. Catherine began pacing the length of my hospital bed, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum. I have already laid the groundwork. I have a family court judge in Cook County whose election campaigns are entirely funded by my commercial real estate political action committees. He eats out of the palm of my hand. The moment I give the signal, he will sign an emergency ex parte order granting Spencer full irrevocable custody of Leo and Lily. You will not even get a hearing. I kept my breathing steady, masking the physical agony in my abdomen. I let her talk, knowing that arrogant people love nothing more than explaining their own brilliant schemes. But a judge is not enough. Catherine continued, a malicious gleam in her eye. To ensure you never get visitation, to ensure you are entirely stripped of your maternal rights. I need a medical consensus, and thankfully private medicine is just another business. I have 3 high-profile psychiatrists on my payroll. These are doctors who cater to the Chicago elite doctors, who know exactly how to write a diagnosis that fits the narrative their benefactor requires. She stopped pacing and stood directly over me, her shadow falling across the cashier check resting on my legs. They will testify that your traumatic 30-hour labor and the emergency surgical delivery caused a catastrophic mental collapse. They will officially diagnose you with severe postpartum psychosis. They will state under oath that your working-class background and the stress of your career left you mentally fragile and that you are an active physical danger to your very own newborn children. Spencer shifted uncomfortably by the door, rubbing the back of his neck, but he remained utterly silent. He was fully complicit in this monstrous plan to declare the mother of his children legally insane. Once the medical affidavits are filed, the judge will issue an involuntary psychiatric hold. Catherine declared, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You will be locked away in a private facility of my choosing. You will be heavily medicated. Your career as a financial technology architect will be obliterated because no bank or tech firm will ever hire an engineer with a documented history of severe psychotic breaks. You will lose your security clearances, your industry credentials, and your livelihood. Brittany chimed in from the doorway, twisting a strand of her blonde hair around her finger. And since you will be declared mentally incompetent, Spencer will be granted full control of all your marital assets. He will liquidate your savings to pay for your mandatory psychiatric care. You will end up bankrupt, Quinn. Exactly. Catherine nodded, pleased with the contribution. If you fight me, you walk away with absolutely zero. You will be institutionalized, heavily indebted, and legally barred from ever seeing Leo and Lily again. I will raise them with Spencer and Brittany at the main estate. They will call Brittany their mother. They will grow up never knowing your name, or if they do, they will only know you as the crazy woman who had to be locked away for their own safety. She reached out and tapped the thick manila folder resting on my lap. Or you can be smart. You can take the $33 million. It is an offshore wire transfer routed through a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. It is untraceable, unassailable, and entirely yours. You take the money, you sign the relinquishment of your parental rights, and you walk out of this hospital a very wealthy, very free woman. You can go start a new life anywhere in the world. You can build all the computer systems you want. You just do it far away from my family. I looked at the cashier check, then up at the cold, calculating eyes of Catherine. She laid out a flawless, ruthless strategy. It was a corporate hostile takeover applied to human lives. She had leverage, she had capital, and she had an inside man in the form of my cowardly husband. Catherine checked her diamond watch one last time. It is exactly 8 in the morning. I am a busy woman and I do not have time to negotiate with the hired help. You have exactly 12 hours to make your decision. I will return to this hospital room at 8 tonight. I will bring my personal notary. She leaned down, her face inches from mine, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly soft register. When I walk through that door tonight, you will have a pen in your hand. You will sign the documents and you will accept the transfer. If you hesitate, if you try to call a lawyer, if you alert the authorities, the deal is off. I will make the calls to the judge and the psychiatrists before you can even dial the phone. Your 12-hour countdown begins right now. Catherine turned on her heel, her tailored suit crisp and unwrinkled. Come along, Spencer. Brittany. We have a nursery to finish decorating. Spencer finally looked up, his eyes briefly meeting mine. There was a flicker of guilt quickly swallowed by his overwhelming fear of his mother. I am sorry, Quinn, he whispered one last time before turning away. Brittany linked her arm through his, casting one final triumphant sneer in my direction. The three of them walked out of the room. The heavy wooden door swung shut behind them, clicking firmly into the doorframe. The sudden silence in the hospital room was deafening. I stared at the closed door, listening to Catherine's designer heels striking the hospital corridor floor. I was entirely alone with a $33 million cashier check and a stack of custody relinquishment papers resting on my lap. Normal people might have broken down. They might have wept, screamed into the sterile hospital pillows, or panicked at the sheer magnitude of the threat. I did none of those things. My tears dried up the very second I recognized the corporate clearinghouse identifier printed on the bottom of that check. My mind, conditioned by years of designing high-frequency trading algorithms and institutional risk assessment models, simply switched tracks. I stopped being a terrified postpartum mother in physical pain and immediately became a financial technology architect facing a massive system vulnerability. I was analyzing variables, calculating threat vectors, and constructing a defensive framework. Catherine had arrogantly laid out her entire strategy for me to see. She had the corrupt judge, she had the paid psychiatrists, she had the massive capital to fund my destruction, but she had also handed me a direct traceable link to her corporate holding accounts. Before I could reach for my secure smartphone hidden in my overnight bag, the hospital room door clicked open again. It swung inward quietly, deliberately, lacking the violent force Catherine had used. I tensed fully, expecting Spencer to have returned to grovel, or perhaps one of Catherine's intimidating private security guards stationed to watch me. Instead, a tall, impeccably dressed African-American man slipped into the room and closed the door firmly behind him. He quickly engaged the deadbolt, sealing us inside. It was Jamal. He was 34 years old, a brilliant corporate lawyer, and Spencer's brother-in-law. Jamal was married to Jocelyn Spencer's younger sister. But far more importantly for my current situation, Jamal served as the senior in-house counsel for Catherine's massive commercial real estate empire. He was the man who drafted her contracts, navigated her local zoning laws, and knew the deeply buried legal architecture of her dynasty inside and out. Jamal approached my bed. He did not offer empty platitudes or pitying looks. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. I heard everything he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. I was standing in the alcove near the nurses' station. I watched them walk in, and I listened closely to every single word Catherine said to you. Then you know I have exactly 11 hours and 45 minutes before she destroys my life, I replied, keeping my voice just as level and detached as his. Jamal pulled a small black USB drive from his tailored suit jacket and held it carefully between his fingers. Catherine thinks she is a god in this city, Jamal said, his dark eyes flashing with a deep, simmering resentment. She thinks she can buy anyone. She thinks she owns Spencer. She thinks she owns Brittany, and she truly believes she owns me. I have spent 5 years working for that woman. 5 years of biting my tongue while she makes her subtle, covertly racist remarks about my background. 5 years of watching her exert tyrannical control over my marriage to Jocelyn, treating me like a diversity hire who should be grateful just to sit at her dining table. Jamal stepped closer to the side of the hospital bed. She uses people, Quinn. She drains them, controls them, and discards them when they no longer serve her bottom line. I am tired of being her legal janitor. I am tired of watching her crush innocent people under the heel of her expensive shoes. And I absolutely refuse to stand by and watch her steal your newborn children. Why are you risking your lucrative career and your marriage to help me? I asked, needing to be absolutely certain of his underlying loyalty before I trusted him. If she catches you betraying her, she will ruin you and disbar you. Because Jocelyn is pregnant? Jamal revealed softly, the anger in his face briefly giving way to a fierce protectiveness. We have not told anyone in the family yet. We just found out last week. And looking at what Catherine is doing to you today, I realized exactly what she will try to do to us tomorrow. She will try to own our child too. She will dictate where we live, how we parent, and who our child becomes. I will burn her commercial real estate empire to the ground before I ever let that happen to my family. Jamal placed the encrypted black USB drive directly onto the $33 million check resting on my legs. You need severe leverage, he said. Catherine is not bluffing about the family court judge. His name is Wallace. He is deeply corrupt, and she has him fully in her pocket. But Catherine is profoundly arrogant. She likes to keep meticulous records of her leverage over people to ensure their loyalty. I looked down at the drive. What exactly is on this? Encrypted audio files and offshore ledger records, Jamal explained. I am her senior in-house counsel. She tasks me with structuring her political action committees. Over the past 3 months, I have been quietly archiving her private meetings. This drive contains undeniable proof of her funneling untraceable campaign funds to Judge Wallace through a series of shell companies registered in Delaware. It also contains the preliminary drafts of the false medical affidavits she intends to force those private psychiatrists to sign. My mind raced as the pieces of the puzzle snapped together. If this gets out, it is not just judicial bribery, it is federal wire fraud and conspiracy to commit perjury. Exactly, Jamal nodded. But we cannot just hand this over to the local Chicago police. She has half the precinct commanders on her payroll. We need a massive federal trigger. We need a way to completely bypass the local corruption and bring the full weight of the federal government down on her head. And we need to do it before she executes her plan tonight. I am a financial technology architect, I told him, a genuine, dangerous smile finally breaking across my exhausted face. I do not need the local police. I just need a digital entry point into her holding companies. If you give me the network pathways, I can track every single dollar she moves. I can trigger an automatic federal audit that she will never see coming until it is too late. I brought you something else, Jamal said, reaching into his leather briefcase. He pulled out a secure encrypted laptop and placed it on the rolling hospital table beside my bed. I know you could not bring your work hardware into the delivery room. This is a clean machine. It has an untraceable Internet Protocol address. It is pre-loaded with the military-grade decryption keys required to open the files on the USB drive. I reached out and opened the laptop. The screen illuminated the dim hospital room, casting a pale blue glow over the relinquishment papers and the massive check. The pain in my surgical incision was completely gone, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. Catherine thought I was just a desperate working-class girl she could easily crush with her checkbook. She had absolutely no idea she had just locked a data architect in a room with the exact digital tools needed to dismantle her entire life. We have a lot of work to do, I said, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. We need to set a flawless trap. She is coming back at 8 tonight, Jamal reminded me, stepping back toward the door to check the hallway. She expects you to sign those documents. I will sign them, I replied, my eyes locked on the glowing screen. I will play the defeated, broken woman she fully expects to see. I will demand the money be wired immediately. But she is not going to get the contract she thinks she is getting. We are going to rewrite the terms of my surrender. Jamal smiled, a hard, predatory expression settling on his face. I am the one who drafts her personal contracts, Quinn. Tell me exactly what you need her to sign, and I will make sure the paperwork looks identical to the relinquishment forms. The alliance was officially forged in the sterile quiet of that recovery room. Catherine believed she held all the cards. She believed she was playing a simple game of intimidation and power. But she was about to step directly into a digital minefield, designed by a woman who engineered global financial security networks for a living. I was not just going to take my children and run. I was going to mathematically, legally, and permanently erase Catherine's empire from the face of the earth. I plugged the encrypted black USB drive into the side port of the clean laptop. The machine hummed to life, casting a harsh white light across my face. Despite the lingering sting of my surgical incision, my posture straightened. The hospital room faded away. The monitors, the IV, dripped, the sterile walls all dissolved into the background as my screen populated with lines of encrypted data. I opened the military-grade decryption software Jamal had preloaded and began running the decryption keys. A progress bar crawled across the screen. My fingers danced across the keyboard, bypassing standard security firewalls with the muscle memory of a veteran architect. My breathing slowed. The emotional devastation of Spencer's betrayal was neatly compartmentalized, locked away in a mental vault. Right now, I was not a heartbroken wife. I was an apex predator hunting in my natural habitat. The progress bar hit 100%. The drive unlocked, revealing hundreds of meticulously organized folders. Jamal had done his homework. He had archived board meeting minutes, private email transcripts, and offshore banking ledgers. I opened the first financial directory. My immediate goal was verifying the threat against my children by finding Judge Wallace. It took less than 3 minutes to find the transaction logs. Catherine had not been clumsy enough to write a direct check, but she was arrogant enough to leave a digital trail. She had routed continuous heavy payments through a Delaware shell corporation disguised as a commercial property management consulting firm. I traced the outgoing wire transfers from that shell company directly into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. A quick cross-reference with campaign disclosures and property records confirmed the offshore account belonged to a trust managed by Judge Wallace's brother-in-law. It was a classic textbook money laundering loop designed to fund the judge's re-election campaigns and pad his retirement. Catherine had purchased the justice system on a monthly retainer. The legal threat was absolutely real. If I did not act tonight, Judge Wallace would happily sign away my parental rights by tomorrow morning. But exposing a corrupt family court judge was not enough to eradicate Catherine. I needed to understand the exact anatomy of her wealth. I needed to find the load-bearing pillar of her entire operation and demolish it. I opened a secondary terminal window and began mirroring the internal financial structures of Catherine's primary holding company. My daily job involved stress testing the digital infrastructure of massive banking institutions. Analyzing a regional commercial real estate empire was almost offensively easy. I deployed a series of automated tracking scripts to map her asset portfolios, cross-referencing the internal ledgers Jamal provided against public tax filings, SEC disclosures, and institutional loan registries. The data began to compile into a massive interconnected web of corporate entities, subsidiary LLCs, and anonymous trusts. Lines of code cascaded down my screen, translating into a stark, undeniable financial reality. As I scrutinized the balance sheets, a glaring pattern emerged. Catherine projected the image of a billionaire titan with unlimited liquid capital. She flaunted her wealth to control her family and terrify her enemies. But the digital footprint told a completely different story. Her empire was an elaborate, highly unstable house of cards. She owned massive commercial skyscrapers across Chicago, but she owned them on paper. Every single major property was heavily leveraged to an incredibly dangerous degree. She had recklessly taken out exorbitant commercial loans against her existing buildings simply to finance the ongoing acquisition of massive new ones. Her debt-to-asset ratio was staggeringly high across the board. She was constantly shifting borrowed funds between different subsidiaries just to cover her massive recurring monthly interest payments. I ran a liquidity analysis algorithm on her master accounts. The result made me pause and stare at the screen in absolute disbelief. Catherine's entire multi-billion-dollar operation was running on a razor-thin margin of actual liquid cash. To maintain her pristine credit rating and keep the commercial banks from calling in her massive loans, she had to maintain a specific mandatory liquidity threshold. If her cash reserves dropped below that critical baseline for even 24 hours, it would trigger automatic default covenants embedded in her commercial mortgages. The banks would instantly freeze her operational accounts. The ruthless creditors would swarm. The empire would implode overnight. My eyes darted toward the physical cashier, check resting on my hospital bed. $33 million. Catherine had thrown that money at me as if it were pocket change. But looking at the master ledger glowing on my screen, I realized $33 million in liquid cash was an enormous disruption to her operational ecosystem. She did not have that kind of idle capital just sitting in a standard checking account waiting to be spent. To produce a certified cashier check of that magnitude on a Sunday morning, she had to have pulled it from a highly restricted, heavily regulated capital reserve. This was no longer a domestic dispute. This was high-stakes corporate espionage. I began running specific traceroute programs to determine the exact origin point of the $33 million. I needed to know which specific vault she had raided to fund my forced exile. If she had liquidated a personal asset, it was a clean transaction. But if she had illegally bypassed corporate governance or violated federal banking regulations to extract that cash, she had unknowingly handed me the detonator to her own explosive ruin. My fingers flew across the keyboard, isolating the transaction hashes linked to the clearinghouse identifier on the physical check. I tunneled deeper into her restricted corporate intranet, peeling back layers of administrative security. I was deliberately hunting for the origin account, mapping out the digital fingerprints left behind, by her panicked, arrogant withdrawal. The hospital room vanished completely as I rapidly descended into the absolute core of her financial matrix, searching for the fatal error that would permanently bury Catherine and Spencer. The shrill, piercing ring of the hospital room landline shattered my intense concentration, echoing sharply against the cold, tiled walls. I pulled my hands away from the keyboard, my eyes darting from the cascading data streams on the laptop screen to the glowing red indicator on the wall-mounted phone. Nobody was supposed to call this extension. My parents had passed away years ago. My few close friends knew I was resting, and the hospital staff would simply walk through the door. There was only one group of people arrogant enough to bypass hospital protocol and call a recovering surgical patient directly. I reached over the metal bed rail and lifted the heavy plastic receiver to my ear. I did not say a word. I simply waited, letting the dead air stretch across the line. "Well, you are still there," Brittany said, her voice dripping with toxic satisfaction, loud and crisp through the receiver. "I was honestly hoping you had already packed your sad little overnight bag and hailed a taxi. Spencer and I are incredibly eager to get this transition over with." I kept my breathing perfectly even. The sound of her voice, so entirely devoid of empathy, should have triggered a massive spike of rage. Instead, it only deepened my icy resolve. "Where are you calling from, Brittany?" I asked, keeping my tone carefully neutral, playing the role of the defeated, humiliated wife she desperately wanted me to be. "I am sitting on the edge of the king-sized bed in the master suite." Brittany purred, the sound of rustling fabric echoing clearly in the background. "My assistant just finished moving the last of my designer clothes into the walk-in closet. We had to bag up all your cheap corporate suits to make room. I told the maids to drop them off at a local charity center. You will not be needing them anyway, since Catherine guarantees you will never work in this city again. I must say your taste in interior decorating was dreadfully boring. Spencer agreed we need to hire a professional to gut this entire wing of the estate." I let her gloat. Arrogant people love an audience, and when they feel victorious, they become dangerously careless. "The nursery is next," Brittany continued, her voice practically vibrating with cruel delight. "That depressing pale yellow paint you chose is being covered with a custom textured wallpaper right now. By the time Catherine brings Leo and Lily home from the hospital, there will be absolutely zero trace that you ever existed in this house. You are being erased, Quinn. You are nothing but a minor bureaucratic error that Catherine is paying to delete from our perfect lives." "Is that what you think this is?" I asked, injecting just enough fake desperation into my voice to feed her inflated ego. "You think $33 million just magically deletes me? It absolutely does." Brittany laughed, a sharp, grating sound that made my skin crawl. "You really have no idea how true wealth operates, do you? You think 33 million is some massive, insurmountable fortune because you had to work for a living? But for Catherine, it was barely a logistical inconvenience. She did not even flinch when she drew up the paperwork. I highly doubt she had $33 million in liquid cash, just sitting idle in a checking account on a Sunday morning. I pushed back gently, laying the verbal trap with surgical precision. Even billionaires have strict capital restrictions. Brittany scoffed loudly, eager to prove her insider knowledge and flaunt her perceived superiority. "Please, Catherine is practically invincible in Chicago. She did not need to liquidate anything important. She just made a few phone calls to her accounting director and pulled some strings from the employee pension shell accounts. It took her less than 20 minutes to bypass the internal withdrawal limits and generate that cashier check. She considers it a minor administrative fee to secure the family bloodline." The hospital room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My heart slammed against my ribs, but my voice remained a flat, dead calm. "She took the money from the employee pension funds." "Of course she did," Brittany bragged, entirely oblivious to the catastrophic admission she had just made. "The commercial real estate holdings have massive employee retirement trusts. Catherine routinely shuffles that money through offshore shell accounts to fund private acquisitions when she needs rapid liquidity. She is the managing director. It is her company. She does whatever she wants. Now stop stalling, Quinn. Sign the papers, take your stolen retirement funds, and get out of our lives before we have you locked in a psychiatric ward." I did not say another word. I gently placed the receiver back onto the cradle, severing the connection. I sat in the silent hospital room, staring at the blank wall opposite my bed, a cold, ruthless smile slowly spreading across my face. I closed the connection to the hospital room landline, my heart hammering a steady, relentless rhythm against my ribs. Brittany had just handed me the exact coordinates to Catherine's jugular. The $33 million check resting on my lap was not just a bribe, it was radioactive. In the United States, corporate employee pension funds are fiercely protected by the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. They are heavily monitored by the federal government. A corporate director cannot simply dip into a pension trust to fund a private transaction. Funneling $33 million out of an employee retirement fund through offshore shell accounts to generate a personal cashier's check was not just a minor financial crime. It was a massive, highly illegal breach of fiduciary duty. It was federal wire fraud. It was a guaranteed mandatory federal prison sentence. Catherine had not just handed me my freedom, she had handed me the murder weapon. If I deposited that check, and if I knew exactly how to flag the specific transaction hashes to the relevant regulatory bodies, the resulting explosion would not involve local Chicago police or bribed family court judges. It would immediately trigger the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Department of Labor, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I turned my attention back to the encrypted laptop provided by Jamal. My fingers struck the keys with renewed lethal velocity. I no longer needed to search randomly through Catherine's massive corporate matrix. I had the exact target. The hospital's public Wi-Fi was notoriously porous, a risk I couldn't afford. I initiated a localized hardened VPN tunnel, routing my connection through secure servers I maintained for independent stress testing. This connection bypassed the hospital's network, entirely dropping me directly into the back-end architecture of the U.S. financial banking grid. These were systems I had literally helped design during my tenure at the Federal Reserve's Technology Oversight Division. I knew every backdoor, every monitoring protocol, and every trigger wire. I isolated the employee pension trust directories Jamal had scraped and cross-referenced them against the routing number printed at the bottom of the cashier's check on my lap. The digital ledger confirmed Brittany's arrogant boast perfectly. The money was indeed stolen directly from the retirement accounts of thousands of hardworking employees in Catherine's real estate conglomerate. Catherine had robbed her own workforce to buy my children. My smile widened into a predator's grin. The 12-hour countdown Catherine had imposed on me was no longer a ticking clock marking my execution. It was the countdown to her absolute, irreversible destruction. I began writing the automated reporting scripts, weaving a sophisticated digital net that would catch every single fraudulent transaction in her empire. The moment that money hit my designated offshore account, the trap would snap shut with bone-crushing force. I didn't just want to report the transaction. I wanted to ensure the ensuing federal response was immediate, automated, and impossible for Catherine's lawyers to intercept or delay. I constructed a cascading sequence of alerts. First, the script would trigger a suspicious activity report, SAR, directly within the clearinghouse network, prioritizing the flag with a severity code reserved for massive institutional fraud. Second, it would compile a fully formatted whistleblower complaint, complete with the encrypted ledger data proving the ERISA violations, and queue it for direct submission to the SEC's Office of the Whistleblower. Finally, it would generate a separate targeted alert for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, detailing the untaxed offshore routing Catherine used to obscure the pension theft. I linked these scripts to a dead man's switch tied to my own banking app. The trigger was simple. The instant my offshore account registered the $33 million deposit, the scripts would fire simultaneously. There would be no human intervention required, no chance for me to hesitate, and no way for Catherine's bribed officials to intervene before the federal agencies were mobilized. The beauty of the plan lay in its mechanical certainty. Catherine believed she was playing a game of power and intimidation, relying on human weakness and fear. She didn't understand that she was stepping into a machine, a relentless, logical algorithm designed to process violations and output consequences. She had treated me like a disposable variable in her family equation, completely ignoring the fact that I wrote the code that governed her wealth. I reviewed the scripts one final time, checking the syntax and ensuring the encrypted payloads were perfectly aligned with the agency reporting portals. Everything was green. The system was armed. Now all I needed was for Catherine to push the button, and I knew exactly how to make her do it. I closed the terminal windows and wiped my session history from the laptop, leaving no trace of my deep dive into the federal banking architecture. The trap was set hidden beneath the surface of the impending confrontation. I leaned back against the hospital pillows, the physical pain in my abdomen completely overshadowed by the cold, clear anticipation coursing through me. I picked up the cashier's check again, studying the elegant font and the imposing numbers. It wasn't a ticket out of my life. It was the invoice for Catherine's destruction. She had given me 12 hours. I only needed one moment to end her. The hospital room, with its sterile smell and quiet beeping, no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a command center. I was ready for 8 o'clock. I was ready to rewrite the terms of my surrender and unleash the financial guillotine I had just meticulously constructed. The countdown was on, and Catherine had no idea she was the one standing on the trap door. I opened the encrypted messaging application Jamal had installed on the secure laptop. The interface was minimal, a black screen with simple green text leaving no digital exhaust. I typed a single character, a period, to signal I was online and ready. The response came seconds later. Status. Jamal's message blinked onto the screen. The 33 million is radioactive, I typed back, my fingers flying across the keys. I traced the routing numbers. Brittany was boasting. Catherine pulled the funds directly from the employee pension shell accounts. It is federal wire fraud. I have written the scripts to trigger the SEC, the Department of Labor, and the FBI the second the money hits my offshore account. The financial guillotine is rigged. Now we need to handle the legal threat against my children. Catherine gave me until 8 tonight to sign the relinquishment papers. Jamal's response took slightly longer to appear. He was likely pacing in his office, weighing the magnitude of what we were about to execute. When the text finally materialized, it was a precise legal breakdown. Catherine is incredibly arrogant, but she is legally sloppy when she thinks she is untouchable. Under Illinois law, a private contract relinquishing parental rights executed in a hospital room without a formal court hearing and a presiding judge is entirely void. It holds absolutely no legal weight. Then why is she forcing me to sign it tonight? I asked. Because she relies entirely on Judge Wallace to rubber stamp her demands after the fact, Jamal explained. Her strategy is psychological warfare. She breaks you in the hospital, gets your signature on paper, and then uses that paper to justify an emergency ex parte order tomorrow morning. The bribed judge will push it through, citing your signature as proof of your consent and mental instability. By the time a legitimate lawyer could challenge the void contract, Catherine would already have physical custody of Leo and Lily. She weaponizes the bureaucracy of the court system, so we weaponize her arrogance against her. I typed the plan, solidifying in my mind with crystal clarity. We use the fact that she expects a terrified, compliant victim. She will not read the fine print tonight because she assumes she already owns me. Exactly, Jamal replied. I am the one tasked with finalizing the document packet she brought to your room. I have the physical clipboard in my possession right now. I am supposed to act as the family's legal witness when you sign. We can swap the documents. I leaned forward, the glow of the laptop illuminating my face. We are not just going to swap the documents to protect my children, Jamal. We are going to completely disembowel her empire. I want you to draft a new second page. It needs to look identical to the custody relinquishment form. Use the same font, the same margins, the same legal headers. But the actual text must execute two specific actions. First, I need an irrevocable power of attorney, granting me full, uncontested legal authority over Catherine's personal and corporate decisions in the event of federal indictment. That is aggressive, Jamal noted, but legally plausible if she signs it. What is the second action? I want her controlling shares. I typed my keystrokes heavy and deliberate. Draft a transfer of Catherine's 51% controlling stake in her master holding company. But do not transfer the shares directly to me. Transfer them into a newly established blind trust. Name the trust as the sole entity responsible for the long-term financial protection of Leo and Lily. Designate me as the sole unchallengeable managing trustee. The cursor blinked steadily on the black screen for nearly a full minute. I could almost hear Jamal holding his breath on the other end of the encrypted connection. Finally, his response appeared. You are orchestrating a complete corporate coup from a hospital bed. If she signs that swapped page, she legally voluntarily surrenders her entire commercial real estate empire to you. She will not just lose the 33 million, she will lose her voting rights, her assets, and her ability to fight the federal charges. She will be utterly defenseless. She declared war on my children, Jamal. I am simply dictating the terms of her surrender. Draft the documents. Make sure the signature block on page 2 aligns perfectly with the original relinquishment forms. When she storms into this room at 8 o'clock, she will be laser-focused on getting my signature and seizing the twins. She will hand me the clipboard, I will act broken, and she will snatch it back the second I sign. She will not read the text above the signature line until she presents it to Judge Wallace tomorrow morning. It is a massive risk, Jamal cautioned. If she glances at the text, the entire plan collapses. She will instantly trigger the psychiatric hold. She will not look, I assured him, my confidence absolute. Catherine operates on ego. She believes her wealth guarantees obedience. She will only see what she expects to see a defeated woman signing away her life. Prepare the documents, Jamal, and make sure your exit strategy is secure. When the federal agencies raid that building tomorrow, you cannot be anywhere near her legal department. I am resigning my position effective at midnight tonight, Jamal confirmed. I am citing irreconcilable differences regarding corporate governance. It will distance me from the fallout. Jocelyn and I are flying to the West Coast early tomorrow morning to visit her extended family. By the time Catherine realizes she has been legally decapitated, we will be out of state. Perfect. Execute the document swap. I will see you at 8. I closed the encrypted messaging application and powered down the clean laptop. The hospital room returned to its quiet, sterile state. The blinding white light of the screen faded, leaving me in the soft, dim glow of the evening lamps. I carefully tucked the laptop back into my overnight bag, ensuring it was completely hidden from view. I arranged the blankets around my waist, making sure the fresh surgical bandages were slightly visible, emphasizing my physical vulnerability. I needed to look like a woman who had spent the last 12 hours weeping and agonizing over an impossible choice. I picked up the $33 million cashier's check one last time. The heavy paper felt crisp between my fingers. Catherine thought this piece of paper was a weapon that would sever my connection to my children forever. She had no idea it was actually the key that would unlock her federal prison cell. I smoothed my hair, letting a few strands fall messily across my face. I practiced a look of profound, hollow defeat in the reflection of the blank television screen opposite my bed. The stage was set. The digital traps were armed. The forged documents were being prepared. All that remained was the final performance. I closed my eyes, steadying my breathing, and waited for the door to open. Catherine's empire had exactly 1 hour left to live. High above the freezing Chicago streets, Catherine's triplex penthouse was a stark contrast to my sterile recovery ward. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the skyline, a kingdom of steel and glass that Catherine firmly believed belonged to her by divine right. Vintage champagne sat chilling in a heavy crystal bucket on the marble kitchen island. The space was designed to intimidate, filled with modern art and cold angles. Catherine stood by the window, slowly swirling the pale gold liquid in her crystal flute. She looked out over the city with the profound, intoxicating satisfaction of a conqueror who had just executed a flawless, bloodless campaign. She wore a sleek silk evening gown, radiating absolute, uncontested victory. To a perfectly clean transition, Catherine announced, raising her glass toward the center of the vast room. and to the preservation and security of the family bloodline. Spencer and Brittany raised their glasses in response. Spencer let out a long sigh, sinking deep into a plush velvet sofa. He looked like a man who had just narrowly avoided a car accident. The tension gripping his shoulders all day was finally dissolving into the expensive upholstery. "I have to admit, Mom, you handled that perfectly today," Spencer said, taking a greedy gulp of his champagne. "I was terrified she was going to scream or throw things, or demand to go down and see the babies. When you dropped that check on her lap, she just froze completely. It was brilliant. She looked completely broken and helpless." Catherine chuckled, a sharp metallic sound devoid of any actual joy or warmth. "Of course she froze, Spencer. You have to understand working-class psychology. They spend their entire miserable lives stressing over mortgages and credit card bills. When you drop $33 million in liquid cash onto their laps, their brains literally short-circuit. She has never seen that kind of money in her life. She will sign those papers at 8 o'clock, pack up her cheap belongings, and run back to whatever suburban mediocrity she crawled out of. She is probably sitting there planning her tragic new life right now." Brittany leaned against the marble island, admiring her own reflection in the mirrored backsplash. She took a delicate sip of her drink. "I honestly cannot wait to get interior designers into that house," Brittany mused, tracing the rim of her glass. Quinn had absolutely zero taste. The entire East Wing feels like a sterile corporate waiting room. And the nursery pale yellow. "It is an absolute insult to luxury. We are going to need custom Italian cribs and a dedicated wing for the night nurses." Catherine stopped swirling her champagne. She turned slowly away from the window, her gaze landing squarely on the young woman. The triumphant smile faded from the older woman's face, replaced by a rigid, evaluating, predatory stare. The sudden shift in temperature in the room was palpable, dropping instantly to freezing. "Let us get one thing perfectly clear right now, Brittany," Catherine said, her voice dropping the celebratory tone and adopting the sharp, dictatorial cadence she usually reserved for boardroom hostile takeovers. "You are not hiring any interior designers, you are not making unilateral decisions about the estate, and you are certainly not dictating the aesthetics of the nursery for my grandchildren." Brittany blinked rapidly, her smug expression faltering almost instantly. She lowered her glass, looking genuinely confused. "But I am moving in this week. Spencer said we could redesign the entire house to make it ours." Catherine stepped closer to the island, closing the distance until she loomed over the younger woman. "Spencer says a lot of things he has absolutely no authority to promise. You are moving into the house, yes. You are marrying my son, yes. But you are not a co-CEO in this family, Brittany. You are a new acquisition. You were brought in because you understand social optics better than Quinn did, and because you are currently carrying the next heir. Do not ever confuse your utility with actual power." Spencer sank even deeper into the velvet sofa, his eyes dropping to the floor. He took another nervous sip of his champagne, desperately trying to render himself completely invisible to avoid the crossfire. Brittany looked at Spencer silently, begging him to intervene to defend their supposed grand romance. "Spencer, tell her." Brittany pleaded softly, her voice wavering. "We talked about this. We talked about building our own life together." Spencer cleared his throat, but did not meet her eyes. "Well, Britt," he mumbled, shifting uncomfortably. "Mom makes a very good point. The estate technically belongs to the family trust. We have to run any major renovations through the board of directors anyway. It is just much easier to let Mom handle the aesthetics and the staffing. She has a better eye for these things anyway." The absolute betrayal washed over Brittany's face. The grand sweeping romance she thought she had stolen from me was evaporating before her very eyes. She was realizing exactly what I had learned 4 grueling years ago. Spencer was not a prize to be won. He was a spineless, compliant accessory to his mother's massive empire. Catherine pressed her advantage, leaning her hands heavily on the marble counter, invading Brittany's personal space. "Let me outline the strict rules of your new life, my dear. You will dress according to the high-fashion stylist I personally provide for you. You will attend the charity galas I instruct you to attend, and you will smile for the photographers exactly the way you are told. You will not voice dissenting opinions in public. You will raise Leo Lily and your own child, according to the rigid educational and social regimens I have already outlined. You will be the perfect decorative compliant wife. Catherine reached into a leather portfolio resting on the end of the counter and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of legal documents. And before you move a single piece of your luggage into that house, you will sign this prenuptial agreement. It dictates that if you ever attempt to cross me, or if you ever embarrass this family in the press, you will walk away with a strictly capped severance package and absolutely zero custody rights to the child you are currently carrying. Brittany stared at the thick stack of paper, her jaw hanging slightly slack. The color completely drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking pale and sick. The terrifying reality of her victory was setting in. She had not conquered a dynasty. She had simply volunteered to be the newest prisoner in a very expensive, very heavily guarded cage. "But I love him," Brittany whispered, her voice trembling, stripping away the confident, arrogant facade she had paraded around my hospital room just a few hours earlier. "Love is a fictional construct designed to sell movie tickets and cheap jewelry," Catherine replied coldly, sliding the heavy prenuptial agreement across the smooth marble. "Wealth is real. Power is real. You wanted to step up into the major leagues, Brittany. This is exactly what the major leagues look like. Sign the agreement by tomorrow morning, or you can pack your bags and go back to being a junior acquisitions associate living in a cramped rented apartment." Brittany looked at Spencer one last time. He gave her a weak, pathetic, apologetic shrug and looked away again, completely refusing to defend her. The cracks in their perfect, scandalous romance were not just forming. They were splitting wide open, revealing the dark, toxic, controlling core of the family she had fought so desperately to join. Catherine checked her diamond watch. "Drink up, children," she ordered, her tone brisk and commanding. "We have exactly 30 minutes before Jamal arrives with the car. We need to head back to the hospital and collect Quinn's signature. I want those twins legally secured and the paperwork finished before midnight." Catherine turned her back on both of them and faced the floor-to-ceiling windows again, entirely satisfied with her absolute control over her environment. She believed she had orchestrated the perfect evening. She had broken the annoying working-class wife. She had disciplined the ambitious new mistress. And she had reminded her weak son exactly who held the leash. She had absolutely no idea that while she was lecturing Brittany on the strict rules of absolute power, I was busy rewriting the very code her massive commercial empire was built on, ensuring that by morning she would have absolutely nothing left to control. The heavy wooden door to my recovery room swung open precisely at 8 o'clock. Catherine never missed a deadline. She marched into the sterile space with the aggressive, unapologetic confidence of an executioner arriving to collect a long-overdue debt. Her charcoal suit remained immaculate, her posture rigidly upright. Spencer trailed closely behind her, his eyes glued to the scuffed linoleum floor, completely incapable of meeting my gaze. Brittany was mercifully absent, likely back at the penthouse nursing her bruised ego and agonizing over the ironclad prenuptial agreement Catherine had just forced down her throat. Behind Spencer stood Jamal, clutching a thick leather portfolio against his side. His face was a mask of perfect professional indifference. No one looking at him would ever suspect he was the architect of the Trojan horse currently resting inside that portfolio. I knew the success of this entire operation hinged entirely on my performance in the next 10 minutes. I could not just sign the papers. I had to make Catherine believe she had shattered my spirit into 1,000 irreparable pieces. I drew my knees up toward my chest, wincing slightly to emphasize my physical vulnerability. I let my shoulders slump, abandoning my usual confident posture. I had spent the last 20 minutes deliberately rubbing my eyes to make them red, swollen, and bloodshot. I forced my breathing to become shallow, ragged, and erratic. As Catherine approached the foot of my bed, I squeezed my eyes shut and let the first heavy tears spill over my lashes, tracing hot, pathetic paths down my cheeks. "I see you have spent the day reflecting on your extremely limited options," Catherine said, her voice echoing coldly off the acoustic ceiling tiles. She sounded like she was inspecting a newly acquired, slightly damaged piece of commercial property. "I brought Jamal to witness the signatures and finalize the transfer. Have you reached the only logical conclusion available to you, Quinn?" I let out a weak, pathetic sob, clutching the thin hospital blanket with trembling hands. I have no choice, I whispered, injecting every ounce of manufactured desperation I could muster into my voice. You know I have no choice. If I try to fight you in family court, you will bribe the judge. You will pay those psychiatrists to lock me in a psychiatric ward. You will take Leo and Lily away from me, and I will be left with absolutely nothing. Catherine smiled. It was a terrifying, triumphant expression radiating absolute malice. She reveled in my tears, feeding on my fabricated misery like a parasite. Exactly, she purred, stepping closer to the side of the bed. I am glad you finally understand the reality of your situation. You see, Quinn, this was always going to be the outcome. Your surrender was entirely predictable. It is the defining characteristic of the working class. You people always talk a big game about morality and maternal love, but at the end of the day, you will always capitulate when someone shows you enough zeros on a certified check. I looked over at Spencer, letting my chin tremble uncontrollably. Spencer, please, I begged, pitching my voice to sound completely broken and hopeless. They are your children. How can you let her do this to me? How can you let her take my babies? Spencer shifted his weight, his face flushing a deep, embarrassed crimson. He refused to look at me, staring instead at the blood pressure monitor blinking on the wall. It is for the best, Quinn, he mumbled, reciting his mother's script with robotic compliance. Mom knows how to handle these situations. You taking the money is the cleanest break for everyone. Brittany and I will make sure the twins are raised right. Just sign the papers so we can all move on. His cowardice was nauseating, but it played perfectly into my hands. I let out another loud, racking sob, burying my face in my hands. I wept openly, making sure my shoulders shook with the physical effort. Inside my mind, behind the curtain of fake tears, my digital architect brain was cold, calculating, and completely detached. I was evaluating the positioning of the actors in the room, measuring Catherine's hubris, and waiting for the optimal moment to strike. Stop your pathetic blubbering! Catherine snapped, her brief moment of amusement giving way to sharp, elitist annoyance. You are walking away with $33 million. You are set for life. You can buy yourself a nice little house in whatever mediocre suburb you prefer and pretend this marriage never happened. Do not act like you are facing a firing squad. You are cashing out at the absolute peak of your extremely limited market value. We needed healthy heirs, and you provided them. Your utility is finished. She turned to Jamal and snapped her fingers impatiently. Give her the clipboard, Jamal. Let us get this over with. I want to inspect the nursery down the hall before we leave the hospital. Jamal stepped forward, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He unzipped the leather portfolio and pulled out a heavy wooden clipboard. Attached to it was a thick stack of legal documents. The top page was emblazoned with the terrifying legal header for the voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. It looked intimidating, final, and absolute. But I knew exactly what lurked underneath. Jamal had flawlessly swapped the second page. Below that terrifying cover sheet rested an irrevocable power of attorney and a complete transfer of Catherine's controlling corporate shares into my newly formed blind trust. Jamal handed me the clipboard and a heavy silver fountain pen. His dark eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. It was a fleeting, invisible exchange of absolute solidarity. The weapon was loaded. The safety was off. I took the clipboard with violently shaking hands. I let the pen slip from my fingers, once forcing it to clatter against the plastic tray table to really sell my absolute loss of motor control. I gasped for air, acting as though the simple act of holding the contract was physically destroying me. I need the money to survive. I cried out softly, my voice breaking perfectly on the final syllable. I cannot fight your lawyers, Catherine. I cannot go to a psychiatric ward. Just give me the money and I will sign. Catherine crossed her arms over her chest, practically vibrating with the thrill of total domination. She was completely blinded by her own massive ego. She saw exactly what she wanted to see, a defeated, helpless poor girl submitting to the overwhelming power of billionaire wealth. She had absolutely no idea she was staring at the architect of her own impending doom. I took a deep, shuddering breath, ensuring the heavy wooden clipboard trembled slightly in my grip. I looked up at Catherine, forcing my eyes to appear wide, pleading, and entirely defeated. "I will sign," I said, my voice barely above a ragged whisper. "I will sign everything you want me to sign. But I need the money first. I need it transferred into my account right now before I put this pen to paper. I will not leave this hospital with nothing but a verbal promise from a woman who hates me." Catherine let out a sharp sigh, clearly annoyed by the procedural delay, but far too eager to secure the twins to put up a substantial fight. "Typical working-class paranoia," she muttered, pulling a sleek silver tablet from her designer handbag. "You genuinely believe I would stoop to defrauding you out of a mere $33 million I spend that much on quarterly landscaping for my commercial properties in the Loop. But fine. If it expedites your permanent departure, we will do it your way. Give me your account details." I reached for my overnight bag, my hands still feigning a severe tremor, and pulled out a small, folded slip of paper. I had prepared this precisely for this moment. It contained the routing and account numbers for a highly secure, anonymous offshore account I had established in the Cayman Islands months ago. I handed the paper to Jamal, who wordlessly passed it to Catherine. She took the paper, her manicured fingers flying across the tablet screen as she logged into her master banking portal. I watched her closely, memorizing the sequence of her keystrokes and the specific secure application she was using. This was the moment of absolute vulnerability. She was opening the vault, exposing the stolen pension funds to the light of day. She was about to commit federal wire fraud right in front of me. Spencer shifted his weight from foot to foot, looking anxiously at the heavy wooden door, as if he expected someone to burst in and stop the transaction. He was sweating, a light sheen of perspiration gathering on his forehead. He knew exactly what his mother was doing, and he was terrified of the legal consequences. But his fear of Catherine was far stronger than his fear of federal prison. He remained silent, a cowardly accomplice to his own impending ruin. "It is processing," Catherine announced, her voice bored and impatient. "It is an international wire, so it requires a dual authorization protocol to clear the institutional firewalls." She tapped the screen twice more, finalizing the command with a swift, arrogant swipe of her finger. "There. The transfer is officially initiated. It should clear your offshore account within the next 90 seconds. Now pick up the pen and sign the relinquishment forms, Quinn. We are done here." I did not move. I stared at the blank television screen mounted on the wall opposite my hospital bed, using its dark, mirrored reflection to monitor the faint blue glow of the encrypted laptop hidden beneath my thick hospital blankets. I had left the banking terminal open, running a continuous refresh script on the offshore account. I was waiting for the exact moment the massive deposit registered in the system. "I need to see the confirmation," I insisted, my voice tight and strained, maintaining the illusion of a desperate, paranoid woman. "I will not sign a single page until I see the funds clear." Catherine rolled her eyes dramatically, snapping the cover of her tablet shut. "This is absurd. You are testing my patience, Quinn. The money is transferred. I do not have time to sit here and coddle your financial anxieties. Sign the damn papers so I can go see my grandchildren." Jamal stepped forward, his voice calm and deeply authoritative, playing his role as the neutral legal witness perfectly. "The transaction is processing, Catherine. It is standard legal procedure to await final confirmation before executing an irrevocable transfer of parental rights. We have the time. Let her see the deposit clear. It protects you from any future claims of coercion or breach of contract." Catherine glared at Jamal, clearly furious at being contradicted by her in-house counsel, but she crossed her arms tightly over her chest. "Fine. 90 seconds. And then you sign, or I call Judge Wallace right now and we do this the hard way. You will leave with nothing." The hospital room fell into a tense, suffocating silence. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor, which had spiked slightly, betraying the intense adrenaline coursing through my veins. I kept my eyes locked on the reflection in the television screen. 30 seconds passed in agonizing slow motion. 60 seconds. The silence in the room felt heavy enough to crush bone. Catherine tapped her designer heel against the linoleum floor, radiating pure annoyance. Then a bright green notification flashed across the hidden terminal screen beneath my blankets. Deposit confirmed. $33 million. My heart slammed against my ribs with the force of a freight train. The funds had fully cleared. Catherine had officially transferred $33 million of stolen employee pension funds into an offshore account. The crime was complete, digitally documented, and entirely irreversible. I let out a long, shaky breath, allowing my shoulders to slump in an exaggerated display of overwhelming relief and total defeat. "It is there," I whispered, my voice thick with fake emotion. "The money is there. I told you it would be." Catherine sneered, stepping back from the bed with a look of utter disgust. "Now sign the papers and get out of my sight." I picked up the heavy silver fountain pen Jamal had provided. I positioned the tip over the signature line on the first page of the document stack. But my mind was not on the signature. My mind was entirely focused on the hidden laptop resting on my thighs. With my left hand concealed completely beneath the heavy hospital blankets, I executed a complex, pre-memorized series of keystrokes on the hidden keyboard. I triggered the digital dead man switch. In a fraction of a second, the automated scripts I had meticulously written the night before fired simultaneously. A suspicious activity report, flagged with a severe priority code, reserved exclusively for massive institutional money laundering, was instantly transmitted into the Federal Clearinghouse network. A fully formatted whistleblower complaint, complete with the encrypted ledger data, proving the profound Employee Retirement Income Security Act violations, bypassed all local firewalls and landed directly in the secure inbox of the Securities and Exchange Commission office of the whistleblower. And finally, a targeted digital alert detailing the untaxed offshore routing Catherine used to obscure the massive pension theft was transmitted to the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The digital guillotine dropped with bone-crushing force. There was no going back. The federal agencies were now fully mobilized. The silent, invisible alarms were ringing in Washington, echoing through the secure servers of the most powerful regulatory bodies in the entire country. Catherine's massive real estate empire was officially bleeding out, and she had absolutely no idea she had just pulled the trigger herself. I looked down at the wooden clipboard resting on my lap. The federal trap was successfully set. The explosion was mathematically guaranteed. Now all that remained was the legal sleight of hand. I needed to sign the documents in front of me, but I needed to ensure I was signing the forged second page Jamal had so flawlessly prepared. I gripped the silver pen tightly, ready to execute the final maneuver that would strip Catherine of her remaining power and secure my children forever. Jamal stepped forward, the heavy wooden clipboard extended toward me. His face was a masterpiece of corporate indifference. He looked exactly like the highly paid, obedient legal servant Catherine expected him to be. But as he handed me the clipboard, he angled it slightly, ensuring the thick stack of documents completely shielded my hands from Catherine's view. I took the clipboard. It felt impossibly heavy, weighted with the entire future of my family. I looked down at the first page. It was the official cover sheet, a summary of the relinquishment agreement emblazoned with the terrifying legal header Catherine had approved. My name was printed at the bottom, waiting for my signature. I picked up the heavy silver fountain pen Jamal had provided. "I need a moment," I gasped, letting out another shuddering sob. I let my hand shake violently, the tip of the pen hovering just inches above the paper. "I cannot do this. Please, Spencer." Spencer took a sudden panicked step backward, colliding with a rolling medical cart. A metal tray clattered to the floor, sending a handful of sterile instruments scattering across the linoleum with a sharp, jarring crash. The sudden noise shattered the tense quiet of the room. Catherine whipped around, her eyes blazing with fury. "Spencer, you clumsy idiot!" she hissed, entirely distracted by the sudden chaos. "Pick that up before a nurse comes in here and starts asking questions. We do not have time for interruptions." Spencer scrambled to his knees, frantically gathering the scattered metal instruments. Catherine hovered over him, berating him in a harsh, impatient whisper. It was the perfect misdirection. Jamal had planned the collision perfectly. In the brief, chaotic window, while Catherine's attention was entirely diverted, I moved with lethal precision. I did not sign the cover sheet. I flipped the first page over, exposing the second page beneath it. It looked identical to the relinquishment form. The same crisp font, the same precise margins, the same intimidating legal headers. But the dense paragraphs of text above the signature line were entirely different. This was the irrevocable power of attorney. This was the total unconditional transfer of Catherine's controlling corporate shares into a newly established blind trust. I didn't hesitate. I didn't tremble. I pressed the silver nib of the fountain pen to the paper and signed my name with a swift, decisive flourish. I signed away her empire. I signed away her power. I signed away her entire future. I flipped the cover sheet back into place, concealing the forged second page. I quickly signed the top document, completing the illusion. I took a deep, shuddering breath and let out a final pathetic wail of defeat. "It is done," I cried out softly, my voice breaking perfectly. "I signed them. Just take them and leave me alone." Catherine spun around, abandoning her berating of Spencer. She practically lunged at the bed, snatching the heavy wooden clipboard from my hands with predatory eagerness. She did not even bother to hide her triumphant, malicious grin. She looked at the first page, verifying my signature on the cover sheet. She flipped to the second page, her eyes scanning the bottom margin where my name was scrawled in wet black ink. She did not read the dense legal text hovering just inches above the signature line. She did not parse the complex, legally binding paragraphs detailing the irrevocable power of attorney or the transfer of her controlling corporate shares into a blind trust. Her arrogance was total, blinding, and absolute. She believed she had orchestrated a flawless victory. She believed she had successfully bullied a terrified working-class woman into submission using the sheer, overwhelming weight of her billion-dollar empire. She simply saw what she expected to see: a defeated mother signing away her children in exchange for a massive payoff. She also saw a blank line at the bottom of the second page, requiring her own signature to finalize the agreement. Catherine did not hesitate. She pulled a gold pen from her designer handbag, clicked it open, and signed her name with a sharp, aggressive stroke right beneath mine. She had just legally, voluntarily, and irrevocably surrendered 51% of her entire commercial real estate empire to a blind trust I controlled. She had just signed her own corporate death warrant. "Excellent," Catherine pronounced, snapping the clipboard shut and handing it back to Jamal. "File these with Judge Wallace's clerk immediately. I want the emergency ex parte order finalized before noon." She turned her attention back to me, her expression radiating pure, unadulterated contempt. "You made the right choice, Quinn. You are finally showing some rudimentary business sense." She checked her diamond watch, already mentally moving on to the next item on her agenda. "Spencer, go coordinate with the hospital administration. Tell them we are initiating an immediate private medical transfer for the twins. I want them moved to the neonatal wing at Northwestern Memorial within the hour. My personal pediatricians are already standing by. We are not leaving them in this mediocre facility a second longer than necessary." Spencer, clutching the gathered medical instruments, nodded eagerly. He was deeply relieved that the confrontation was over and he had survived his mother's wrath. "Yes, Mom. I will handle it right now." He practically sprinted out of the room, desperate to escape the suffocating tension and avoid looking at me one last time. Catherine turned toward the door, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her immaculate charcoal suit. "Do not linger, Quinn," she ordered over her shoulder, not bothering to look back. "The hospital staff has been instructed to expedite your discharge. You have your money. Now honor the agreement and disappear. If I ever see your face in this city again, I will ensure you regret it for the rest of your miserable life." She walked out, her heels clicking sharply down the corridor, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and absolute devastation in her wake. Jamal remained in the room for a fraction of a second longer. He looked at me, a brief, hard nod of confirmation, serving as our only farewell. The documents were secured. The federal agencies were alerted. The trap was locked. He turned and followed Catherine out the door, moving swiftly to execute his own exit strategy before the impending explosion leveled the entire corporate landscape. The heavy wooden door clicked shut, plunging the hospital room back into silence. I sat alone, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, the only sound breaking the stillness. The performance was over. The tears dried instantly. The trembling in my hands vanished, replaced by a cold, steady, focused energy. I threw back the hospital blankets, ignoring the sharp, tearing pain in my surgical incision. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, my feet hitting the cold linoleum floor. I had exactly 1 hour before Catherine realized she had been legally decapitated and her empire was actively burning to the ground. I had 1 hour to secure my children and vanish into the digital ether. I reached for the medical tape securing the intravenous lines to the back of my left hand. I did not pause to consider the sharp sting. I ripped the adhesive away in one violent fluid motion. Blood welled up from the puncture site, bright and stark against my pale skin, but I simply pressed a sterile gauze pad over it and held it tight. The physical agony of my fresh surgical incisions screamed in protest as I stood fully upright, but my mind forcefully muted the pain. I was no longer a patient. I was a mother executing a hostile extraction. I moved to the small plastic closet near the bathroom. Inside was the dark, oversized hoodie and loose sweatpants I had packed weeks ago. I stripped off the thin hospital gown, gritting my teeth as the cold air hit my bandaged abdomen. I dressed methodically, pulling the hood up to cast a deep shadow over my face. I grabbed my secure laptop, shoved it into my overnight bag, and slung the strap over my shoulder. The bag felt heavy, loaded with the digital weapon that was currently dismantling Catherine's billionaire status. A soft, rhythmic knock sounded at the door. 2 short taps, a pause, then one more. It was the signal we had established. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Jamal slipped back inside, but he was not alone. Behind him stood 3 individuals dressed in immaculate, unbranded navy blue medical scrubs. They carried professional transport gear, their expressions entirely focused and unreadable. Jamal quickly secured the door behind them. "I hired them independently," Jamal stated, his voice a low, urgent murmur. "They operate completely off the grid, handling secure medical transports for high-profile clients who require absolute discretion. Catherine's private security detail is currently setting up a perimeter down in the main lobby, waiting for Spencer to finish the administrative discharge paperwork for the twins. We have a 45-minute window before they realize the babies are missing." The lead medic, a tall, broad-shouldered woman with sharp eyes, stepped forward. Her name tag simply read, Sarah. "We have the transport incubator ready in the service corridor," Sarah reported efficiently. "We also have a forged emergency transfer order bearing the digital signature of the chief neonatologist. It states that the twins require immediate relocation to a specialized cardiac facility across state lines. The paperwork is flawless, but we need to move fast before the nursing staff attempts to verify the order with your husband." I nodded, trusting Jamal's meticulous preparation. "I am ready," I said. We left the recovery room, abandoning the empty hospital bed and the remnants of Catherine's false victory. The hallway was a chaotic blur of morning shift changes. Nurses rushed past with medication carts, doctors reviewed charts at the central station, and alarms chimed in the distance. The generic navy blue scrubs of the transport team blended perfectly into the clinical environment. I walked in the center of the formation, keeping my head down, letting my oversized hood obscure my features. The pain in my core was a dull roar, but my adrenaline pushed it aside completely. We reached the heavy double doors of the neonatal intensive care unit. The restricted access panel required a keycard swipe. Sarah smoothly produced a cloned hospital badge, swiped it against the reader, and the heavy doors clicked open with a quiet, mechanical hum. The atmosphere inside the NICU was entirely different from the rest of the hospital. It was dim, hushed, and intensely monitored. Rows of transparent incubators lined the walls, housing the most fragile lives in the building. I led the team directly to bed 3 and bed 4. Leo and Lily were sleeping peacefully, tiny monitors taped to their chests, completely unaware of the massive corporate war raging outside these walls. An attending nurse immediately stepped into our path, looking confused by the sudden arrival of an unannounced transport team. "Excuse me," the nurse said, her hand hovering over a communication radio clipped to her scrubs. "We are not scheduled for any transports this morning. Who authorized this team?" Sarah did not miss a beat. She handed the forged transfer order directly to the nurse, projecting an aura of absolute medical authority. Emergency specialist transfer authorized by Dr. Evans 5 minutes ago, Sarah stated firmly. We have a critical cardiac window to meet at the receiving facility. The paperwork is digitally verified. The nurse frowned, scrutinizing the document. The signature looked perfectly legitimate, but the suddenness of the request clearly made her uneasy. I should page Dr. Evans to confirm this, the nurse murmured. She reached for her radio. I knew that if she made that call, the entire extraction would collapse. Spencer was likely hovering near the administrative desk on the ground floor. Any alert would send Catherine's security teams swarming up the elevators. I stepped out from behind the medics, pulling my hood back just enough to reveal my face. I am the mother, I said, channeling the cold, commanding authority I used to manage boardrooms full of hostile bank executives. My voice was steady, leaving absolutely no room for debate or hesitation. The transfer has been fully authorized by the family and the chief neonatologist. Every second you delay is putting my children at severe medical risk. Step aside and let my transport team do their job. The nurse looked at my face, recognizing me from my previous visits to the ward. The absolute certainty in my voice, combined with the flawless paperwork and the imposing presence of the specialized medical team, broke her hesitation. She nodded slowly, stepping back from the incubators. I understand, she said, moving to disconnect the hospital monitoring equipment. I will update the system logs to reflect the emergency departure. Sarah and her team moved with breathtaking speed and precision. They expertly transferred Leo and Lily into the secure portable transport incubator they had wheeled in. The specialized unit provided a continuous flow of oxygen and maintained the precise temperature required for their fragile bodies. I watched my children being secured, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. We had breached the fortress. We had secured the assets. Let us move, Sarah ordered softly. The team pushed the transport incubator back toward the double doors, moving with a fast, urgent stride. I followed closely behind them, pulling my hood back over my face to conceal my identity once more. We exited the neonatal intensive care unit and headed straight for the restricted service elevators located at the rear of the building, entirely bypassing the public lobby where Catherine's guards were waiting. We were officially off the grid, executing the final phase of the escape. Sarah stopped abruptly in front of a supply closet. She extracted a standard-issue hospital wheelchair. "Sit down," she commanded in a sharp whisper. "You are bleeding through your sweatpants. If a roving administrator spots a woman trailing blood down a restricted corridor, they will lock down the entire floor. We cannot trigger an internal alarm." I did not argue. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the searing pain of my surgical incisions screamed for attention. I collapsed into the wheelchair, biting my cheek to keep from crying out loud. Sarah tossed a heavy thermal blanket over my lap, concealing the growing bloodstain. The second medic wheeled the transport incubator beside me. The elevator arrived with a harsh, metallic ping, and we filed inside. Jamal swiped his cloned keycard across the control panel, bypassing all passenger floors and sending us plummeting directly toward the subterranean loading docks. As the elevator descended, Jamal's encrypted smartphone vibrated. He pulled it out, his eyes scanning the screen rapidly. His jaw tightened. Catherine just realized the second page of the contract was swapped. He announced, his voice tight with urgency. Her legal team reviewed the digital copies she uploaded to her secure server. She knows she signed away the controlling shares. She knows she signed the power of attorney. She knows you orchestrated the entire maneuver. How far away is her private security detail? I asked, gripping the armrests of the wheelchair. They are no longer waiting in the lobby, Jamal replied. They are actively mobilizing. She dispatched her private security force to the neonatal ward. They will be on our floor in 2 minutes. When they find empty incubators, they will trigger a lockdown. We have 60 seconds before the perimeter is entirely sealed. The elevator jolted to a violent halt at the basement level. The metal doors slid open, revealing a cavernous concrete shipping bay. The air was freezing, a sharp reminder of the brutal Chicago winter raging just beyond the walls. Idling near the massive steel rolling doors was our extraction vehicle. It was disguised flawlessly as a standard private medical transport ambulance, complete with fake registration numbers. The driver, a broad-shouldered man, wearing a dark jacket, immediately threw open the rear doors and lowered the hydraulic loading ramp. "Move now," Sarah ordered. The team pushed my wheelchair and the transport incubator across the rough concrete floor. The ambient noise of industrial laundry machines masked our hurried footsteps. When we reached the back of the ambulance, Sarah made a split-second tactical decision. "The mounting brackets for the incubator take too long to secure," she stated, unlocking the protective dome of the transport unit. "The hospital lockdown protocol will freeze those rolling bay doors in 30 seconds. You hold them." Sarah carefully lifted Leo from the incubator, wrapping him tightly in a thermal swaddle, and placed him directly into my right arm. The second medic followed instantly, placing Lily securely into my left. The sheer weight of my children in my arms erased the agonizing pain in my abdomen. I held them tightly against my chest, feeling their rapid heartbeats syncing with my own. They were so fragile, so entirely dependent on my ability to get them out of this concrete prison. The medics hoisted my wheelchair up the ramp and locked the wheels into the heavy floor brackets of the ambulance. Jamal climbed into the front passenger seat, slamming his door shut. Sarah and her team scrambled into the back with me securing their harnesses. The driver slammed his hand against the dashboard. "Go!" Jamal shouted. The ambulance tires screeched against the concrete as the driver slammed the accelerator. We shot forward toward the massive rolling doors. A loud blaring siren suddenly echoed through the cavernous loading dock. Flashing red strobe lights illuminated the concrete walls. Catherine's security team had reached the neonatal ward. They found the empty beds. The hospital lockdown protocol was officially initiated. The massive steel doors began rolling downward, threatening to seal us inside the basement forever. The driver floored the gas pedal, aiming the heavy ambulance directly at the shrinking gap between the concrete floor and the descending steel door. I curled my body forward, hunching over Leo and Lily to shield them from any potential impact. The ambulance surged through the opening, missing the heavy steel door by mere inches with a terrifying metallic scrape. We burst out of the hospital basement and plunged directly into the freezing Chicago night. The transition from the brightly lit hospital to the pitch-black snow-covered streets was jarring. The driver whipped the steering wheel hard left, sending the ambulance careening down a narrow service alleyway. I looked out the tinted rear window. Through the swirling snow, I saw the main entrance of the hospital illuminated by streetlights. Catherine's private black sports utility vehicles were swarming the front loop. Armed security contractors were pouring out of the cars, rushing the front doors, completely unaware their target had just escaped the basement. We hit the main avenue, blending into the flow of commercial delivery trucks. The flashing lights of the hospital faded into the distance, swallowed by the dense urban sprawl. We had successfully breached the perimeter. Catherine's billions could buy judges and private armies, but they could not catch a ghost. I sat back in the wheelchair, pulling the thermal blanket tighter around my sleeping children. The freezing winter wind howling against the heavy ambulance exterior sounded like absolute victory. I looked back down at Leo and Lily, their tiny faces peaceful and completely undisturbed by the high-stakes corporate warfare that secured their freedom. My body was broken and exhausted, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. We were disappearing into the endless grid of city traffic, leaving Catherine to face the catastrophic financial ruin I meticulously engineered for her. The hardest part of the extraction was over. Now, we just had to reach the airspace before federal agents raided her corporate headquarters. The drive through the dark arteries of the city felt like traversing a frozen labyrinth. We left the glittering hostile skyline of Chicago behind, merging onto the interstate, heading south toward Indiana. The driver pushed the heavy ambulance to its mechanical limits, the engine roaring as we swallowed the miles. Inside the cargo bay, the adrenaline that had fueled my escape began to rapidly metabolize, leaving behind a profound, bone-crushing exhaustion. My surgical incision burned with a relentless tearing heat, but I kept my arms locked tightly around Leo and Lily. Their steady breathing was my only anchor. 50 agonizing minutes later, the ambulance veered off the main highway and navigated a series of desolate, snow-swept industrial roads. We approached a heavy chain-link gate topped with razor wire. A solitary guard stepped out of a small booth, his flashlight cutting through the swirling snow. Jamal lowered his window, flashing a digital access code on his smartphone. The guard nodded, hit a button, and the heavy metal gates rolled open. We had arrived at the private charter airfield. The ambulance sped across the dark, icy tarmac and came to a sudden halt near the end of the runway. Standing like a massive silver spear against the bleak winter night was a Gulfstream jet. Its engines were already whining with a high-pitched, powerful hum, melting the snow on the pavement behind it. The boarding stairs were lowered, bathed in a warm, welcoming light from the cabin interior. The entire flight crew was standing by, ready for immediate departure. I had arranged the charter just hours ago, financing the exorbitant emergency extraction cost using a fraction of the $33 million Catherine so generously wired into my offshore account. Jamal turned in his seat and looked back at me. "This is where I get off," he said, unbuckling his seatbelt. The driver cut the engine, and the heavy silence of the cabin was instantly replaced by the distant roar of the jet. "You are not coming with us?" I asked, adjusting my grip on the sleeping twins. Jamal shook his head, a grim, determined shadow settling over his features. "If I disappear on the same night her empire collapses, it looks like complicity. I need to be here to play the shocked cooperative corporate counsel when the federal agents kick down the doors of her headquarters. I need to guide the Federal Bureau of Investigation directly to the buried ledgers, ensure the narrative stays focused on her employee pension theft, and completely insulate Jocelyn and my unborn child from the blast radius. I am going to stand right next to Catherine as they put the handcuffs on her wrists. I want to see the exact moment she realizes she lost everything." I understood perfectly. Jamal was not just surviving. He was taking control of his own family destiny. He was ensuring the monster who had tormented us both would never rise again. "Thank you, Jamal," I said, my voice thick with genuine gratitude. "You risked everything for us today. You gave me the weapon, Quinn," he replied, opening the passenger door. "I am just making sure it hits the target. Fly safe. Do not ever let them find you." He stepped out into the freezing wind, his dark overcoat instantly dusted with snow. He raised one hand in a final silent salute, then turned and walked rapidly toward a dark sedan parked near the edge of the hangar. Sarah and the medical team moved with immediate, practiced efficiency. They opened the rear doors of the ambulance, and the bitter cold rushed in. Sarah gently lifted Lily from my left arm, while the other medic took Leo. They secured the babies back into the portable transport incubator, shielding them entirely from the brutal winter elements. I gripped the handrails of the wheelchair as they lowered me down the hydraulic ramp and pushed me swiftly across the icy tarmac. The transition from the freezing runway to the heated, luxurious cabin of the Gulfstream jet felt like stepping into an alternate reality. The interior was a masterpiece of leather and polished wood, a stark contrast to the sterile, terrifying hospital room I had occupied just an hour ago. The flight attendant directed Sarah to a specialized medical bay in the rear of the aircraft where they securely locked the transport incubator into place. Sarah helped me transition from the wheelchair into a plush, oversized leather seat. Once I was strapped in, she opened her medical kit. "We are off the grid now," Sarah stated, her professional demeanor softening into genuine care. "You are bleeding, your heart rate is dangerously elevated, and you just survived major abdominal surgery. I am administering a high-dose analgesic. You need to let your body shut down." I nodded, offering no resistance. I felt the cold pinch of a needle in my upper arm. Almost immediately, a heavy, warm wave of relief began to wash over my battered body. The searing, jagged pain in my core dulled into a distant, manageable ache. My muscles wound tight as coiled wire since Catherine breached my hospital room finally began to unspool. The heavy cabin door sealed shut with a pressurized hiss, locking out the Chicago winter. The jet engines spooled up to a deafening roar. I looked out the oval window as the aircraft began to taxi down the runway. The runway lights blurred into continuous streaks of yellow and blue as we gathered terrifying speed. With a powerful, gravity-defying surge, the nose of the jet lifted and we tore into the dark, stormy sky. I watched the sprawling, glittering grid of Chicago shrink beneath us. Down there, the federal warrants were being executed. The financial sirens were wailing. The empire was burning. Up here, wrapped in the quiet hum of a private jet, there was only absolute peace. I unbuckled my harness and forced myself to stand, ignoring Sarah's quiet protests. I walked slowly to the rear of the cabin and looked down into the secure incubator. Leo and Lily were breathing softly, their tiny hands curled into fists. I reached through the access ports and rested my fingers lightly against their warm skin. A profound emotional steeling crystallized within me. For 4 years, I had played the role of the compliant working-class wife bowing to the whims of a billionaire tyrant. I had allowed them to treat me as a temporary incubator, an accessory to their legacy. That woman died today in a hospital recovery room. The woman standing on this plane was a conqueror. I had taken their money. I had stolen their legal authority. I had secured my children. I was leaving the country as the absolute victor. We breached the cloud cover, breaking out into a clear, star-studded night sky. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing our cruising altitude and confirming our direct, unhindered flight path. Our destination was a highly secure banking canton in Geneva, Switzerland. It was a financial fortress, a non-extradition sanctuary where American family court orders held absolutely zero jurisdiction. Catherine's wealth, her influence, and her bribed judges meant nothing across the Atlantic. We were untouchable. I walked back to my seat, reclined the heavy leather chair, and closed my eyes. The war was over. We were going home. While I slept thousands of feet above the Atlantic Ocean, morning violently broke over the icy streets of Chicago. The winter storm that had masked my escape was finally clearing, leaving the city locked in a bitter, freezing stillness. Inside her triplex penthouse, Catherine woke with the pristine confidence of a woman who believed she had flawlessly conquered the world. She dressed with meticulous care, selecting a tailored crimson suit that screamed absolute power and authority. Today was not just another Tuesday. Today was her coronation. She was heading to the Cook County Family Courthouse to officially claim her new heirs and legally erase my existence from her dynasty forever. Catherine did not wait for Spencer or Brittany. She considered them weak, decorative accessories who had already served their purpose. She took her private elevator down to the heated garage, stepping into the back of her waiting armored town car. Resting on the plush leather seat beside her was the heavy wooden clipboard still holding the documents she believed were the maternal relinquishment forms. She had not bothered to glance at the pages since snatching them from my hospital bed the night before. Arrogance had bred a fatal complacency. She simply patted the leather cover, anticipating the profound satisfaction of watching Judge Wallace rubber stamp her total victory. The drive to the courthouse was swift. Catherine's driver bypassed the congested public parking structures, pulling directly into a secure, restricted access loading zone reserved for judges and high-level city officials. Catherine did not wait in lines. She did not pass through the public metal detectors with the desperate, struggling masses of the family court system. She swept through a private rear entrance, her expensive heels echoing sharply against the polished marble floors. She navigated the labyrinthine back hallways with practiced familiarity, heading straight for the private chambers of Judge Wallace. Wallace was a man who appreciated the finer things in life, a lifestyle entirely funded by Catherine's anonymous political action committees and offshore consulting fees. He was expecting her. When Catherine pushed open the heavy oak door to his chambers, the judge was already sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, a fresh cup of coffee steaming beside a stack of blank judicial orders. He looked up and offered a compliant, eager smile, ready to process the fabricated legal emergency they had discussed days prior. "Good morning, Catherine," Judge Wallace greeted her, reaching for his favorite gold-plated pen. "I have the emergency ex parte custody orders drafted and waiting for your documentation. I assume the extraction of the signature went smoothly at the hospital. Flawlessly, Catherine replied, her voice radiating smug satisfaction. She dropped the heavy clipboard directly onto his desk. The girl folded exactly as predicted. She took the buyout and signed her rights away without a single fight. Process the paperwork. Wallace, I want the twins legally transferred to my exclusive custody before noon. I am having my staff move them to the estate this afternoon. Judge Wallace chuckled, eager to please his wealthiest benefactor. He opened the clipboard and glanced at the top page. The standard cover sheet bore my signature acknowledging the voluntary execution of the attached legal documents. Wallace nodded approvingly and flipped to the second page to verify Catherine's countersignature and the notary stamp Jamal was supposed to have applied. Catherine turned away from the desk, walking toward the large window in the judge's chambers to admire the Chicago skyline. She looked out at the towering commercial skyscrapers, identifying the massive buildings her holding company owned, entirely oblivious to the catastrophic realization currently unfolding behind her back. The silence in the room stretched out. It lasted too long. The scratching of the judge's pen never came. Catherine, Judge Wallace whispered. His voice was completely stripped of its usual confident, booming authority. It sounded thin, reedy, and choked with sudden terror. Catherine turned around, her expression twisting in annoyance. What is the delay, Wallace? Just stamp the document and sign the order. I have a board meeting at 10. She stopped dead in her tracks. Judge Wallace was staring at the second page of the document, his face drained of all color. He looked like a man who had just been handed his own terminal diagnosis. His hands were shaking so violently that the heavy wooden clipboard rattled against the polished mahogany desk. He looked up at Catherine, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated panic. This is not a parental relinquishment form. Catherine, the judge, gasped, his chest heaving as if he had forgotten how to breathe. Catherine frowned, stepping quickly back toward the desk. Do not be ridiculous. I watched her sign it myself. I countersigned it immediately after. Jamal drafted the paperwork personally. Judge Wallace slowly rotated the clipboard, pushing it across the smooth surface of the desk until it faced her. His trembling finger pointed to the dense, legally binding paragraphs hovering just above our signatures. You did not read the text, did you? You just signed the bottom line. I read the cover sheet. Catherine snapped, her heart rate beginning to spike as the judge's sheer panic started to infect her. It is standard legal boilerplate. What does it say? Judge Wallace swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. Catherine, you did not secure custody of your grandchildren. You just legally, irrevocably signed over 51% of your entire commercial real estate holding company to a blind trust. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Catherine stared at him, her brain violently rejecting the information. What are you talking about? That is impossible. Read it. The judge pleaded, his voice cracking. It is an irrevocable power of attorney combined with an immediate asset transfer. The beneficiary of the blind trust is designated as the minor children Leo and Lily, but the sole unchallengeable managing trustee with absolute voting control over your corporate shares is Quinn. And you signed it. Your signature is right here, fully executed and legally binding. Catherine snatched the clipboard from the desk, her eyes frantically scanning the dense legal jargon. The words blurred together, then sharpened into a terrifying, undeniable reality. The document was flawless. The legal architecture was airtight. Jamal had drafted a masterpiece of corporate surrender, and she had blindly signed it in her desperate rush to secure a victory. This is a forgery, Catherine hissed, her hands gripping the edges of the clipboard so tightly her knuckles turned bone white. She tricked me. We will invalidate it. Wallace, throw this out and issue the custody order anyway. I cannot do that, Catherine, Judge Wallace protested, shrinking back into his leather chair. This is a fully executed corporate transfer. If I destroy this document, it is not just judicial misconduct. It is massive corporate fraud. It involves billion-dollar assets. The Securities and Exchange Commission monitors transfers of this magnitude. I cannot make this disappear. Catherine's world violently tilted on its axis. The solid, unshakable foundation of her billionaire identity cracked and splintered beneath her feet. She was not a conqueror. She was a victim of the most ruthless, devastating corporate coup she had ever witnessed. The working-class girl she had relentlessly mocked, the woman she thought she could buy for $33 million, had mathematically and legally stripped her of her entire empire. She looked back down at the signature line. My name sat proudly above hers, a permanent, undeniable testament to her absolute defeat. The realization crashed over her with the force of a collapsing skyscraper. She did not own her company anymore. She did not own the buildings she had just been admiring out the window. She had voluntarily handed the keys to her kingdom to the very woman she was trying to destroy. Catherine dropped the clipboard onto the desk, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Her hands began to shake. She reached into her designer handbag, pulling out her mobile phone to call Jamal to demand an explanation, to order him to fix this catastrophic error. But before she could even unlock the screen, the device erupted with incoming calls. Not from Jamal. Not from Spencer. The caller ID flashed the name of her chief financial officer. The corporate alarms had started ringing, and Catherine's total destruction was only just beginning. Catherine's armored town car sped through the frozen streets of Chicago, the tires throwing up dirty slush as her driver navigated the morning traffic with aggressive precision. Inside the soundproof cabin, Catherine was practically vibrating with a mixture of disbelief and absolute unadulterated fury. She gripped her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles ached, replaying Judge Wallace's terrified words over and over in her mind. It was a forgery. It had to be. A working-class girl with no legal training and a bleeding surgical incision could not possibly have orchestrated the complete corporate hijacking of a multi-billion-dollar real estate empire. She needed to get back to headquarters. She needed to summon Jamal to the executive boardroom and fire him on the spot. If he had intentionally swapped those documents, she would personally ensure he never practiced law in the state of Illinois again. She would tear his life apart piece by piece. She would freeze his assets, destroy his reputation, and make sure Jocelyn divorced him before the sun set. Then she would assemble her army of crisis management lawyers, the ruthless fixers she kept on exorbitant retainers, to immediately draft an emergency injunction to invalidate the fraudulent transfer of her controlling shares. She had the money. She had the influence. This was nothing more than a temporary inconvenience, a minor bureaucratic hurdle she would crush beneath her heel before lunchtime. The town car pulled sharply into the private subterranean parking garage beneath her flagship commercial tower. The heavy steel gates clanged shut behind the vehicle, sealing out the bitter cold and the noise of the city. Catherine stepped out before the driver could even open her door, moving with a sharp, militaristic stride toward her private biometric-secured elevator. She swiped her hand across the scanner, and the doors slid open silently, whisking her upward toward the 72nd floor. The executive level was her sanctuary, a sprawling expanse of imported marble-frosted glass and hushed efficiency where her every command was treated as absolute law. As the elevator doors parted with a soft chime, Catherine stepped out, fully expecting the usual deferential silence of her administrative staff. Instead, she was met with a scene of barely suppressed panic. The executive assistants were not at their desks, typing quietly. They were clustered together near the break room, whispering furiously and clutching their cell phones. Phones were ringing off the hook, a relentless shrill cacophony of flashing red lights that no one seemed eager to answer. The atmosphere was charged with a frantic, terrified energy that Catherine instantly despised. "Where is Jamal?" Catherine barked, her voice cutting through the chaotic murmurs like a scythe. "And why is nobody answering the damn phones?" Her senior executive assistant, a woman who usually radiated calm professionalism, practically jumped out of her skin. She hurried over to Catherine, her face pale and her hands trembling. "Ms. Vance, I've been trying to reach you." Jamal sent an encrypted email to the entire executive board at 4 this morning. He resigned effective immediately. He cited irreconcilable differences regarding corporate governance and stated he was leaving the state. His office is completely cleared out. Catherine felt a cold knot form in her chest. Jamal had run. He had orchestrated the document swap and he had fled before she could execute him. The coward. He was a dead man walking. "I want my legal team in the boardroom right now." Catherine commanded, her voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal register. "Every single partner we have on retainer. Find them, pull them out of whatever mediocre meetings they are currently sitting in, and get them up here. I am initiating a full corporate lockdown." Before the assistant could even turn toward the communications desk to relay the order, the heavy glass doors of the executive boardroom burst open. It was Marcus, her chief financial officer. Marcus was a man who usually operated with the steady, unemotional precision of a Swiss watch. He was a veteran of high-stakes corporate finance, a man who never panicked, never raised his voice, and never lost his composure. But as he rushed toward Catherine, he looked like a man who had just watched a commercial airliner crash directly into the building. He was sweating profusely, his tie was loosened, and he was clutching a thick stack of printed ledger reports so tightly the papers were crumbling in his hands. Catherine Marcus gasped, his chest heaving as he skidded to a halt in front of her. The words stumbled out of his mouth in a frantic, terrifying rush. "We have a catastrophic breach. It's an absolute disaster." "Calm down, Marcus." Catherine snapped, entirely misinterpreting the source of his panic. She assumed he had somehow found out about the document swap about the loss of her controlling shares. "I am already handling the legal issue with the trust. Jamal is a traitor, but the transfer is fraudulent. We will reverse it by the end of the day." "This has absolutely nothing to do with Jamal or the trust," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking with sheer terror, completely abandoning the deferential tone he usually employed. He shoved the crumpled ledger reports directly into her hands. "It's the $33 million, the wire transfer you initiated at the hospital this morning. You pulled it directly from the primary employee pension shell accounts. You authorized an unvetted offshore international transfer using restricted retirement funds." Catherine stared at him, her annoyance flaring. "So what I needed rapid liquidity. We do it all the time for acquisitions. We'll just cycle funds back from the commercial leasing accounts tomorrow and patch the hole before anyone notices. It's an internal administrative matter." Marcus looked at her as if she had just confessed to murder. "You don't understand, Catherine. We didn't patch the hole. The transaction didn't just clear, it detonated. Whoever received that money had automated tracing scripts attached to their receiving account. The second the $33 million hit their offshore ledger, those scripts automatically flagged the transfer routing numbers. They bypassed our internal firewalls and sent severe Priority 1 suspicious activity reports directly into the Federal Clearinghouse network." Catherine's stomach plummeted. A cold sweat broke out across the back of her neck. The sheer, terrifying magnitude of her mistake was beginning to crystallize. "Automated scripts," she whispered, the realization hitting her with sickening clarity. Quinn, the working-class girl she had so casually dismissed, was a senior financial technology architect. She hadn't just demanded the money to survive, she had built a digital bomb. "It gets worse." Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper as he looked nervously toward the elevator banks. "The scripts didn't just file a SAR. They compiled a fully formatted whistleblower complaint containing the exact encrypted ledger data, proving we've been using the ERISA-protected pension funds as a private liquidity pool. They sent it directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission's Office of the Whistleblower. And they sent a secondary alert to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division detailing the offshore routing we used to obscure the transaction." Catherine felt the floor drop out from beneath her. This was not a minor regulatory fine. This was not a slap on the wrist from a local auditor she could easily bribe or intimidate. This was federal wire fraud. It was massive institutional embezzlement involving thousands of employees. It was the kind of crime that brought the entire weight of the United States government crashing down on a company. "We have to shut down the servers," Catherine ordered, panic finally breaking through her icy facade. "We have to wipe the internal ledgers. Get the IT department to run the absolute deletion protocols right now. Destroy everything." Marcus shook his head slowly, a look of profound, inescapable doom settling over his features. "It's too late, Catherine. The federal automated systems triggered the alerts an hour ago. The data is already in Washington." Suddenly, the soft chime of the private biometric-secured elevator echoed through the hushed executive floor. The heavy steel doors slid open. Catherine turned fully expecting to see her delayed legal team arriving to manage the crisis. Instead, the elevator bay was entirely filled with men and women wearing dark tactical windbreakers. Emblazoned across their backs in stark, unmistakable yellow lettering were the acronyms SECIRS and FBI. The feds weren't coming. They were already in the building. While Catherine's corporate empire was being systematically dismantled by federal agents in downtown Chicago, an entirely different kind of collapse was unfolding 20 miles away at the family's sprawling suburban estate. Spencer and Brittany had returned from the hospital an hour earlier, entirely convinced that the morning's hostile negotiation had secured their perfect, unbothered future. Spencer felt a profound sense of relief that he had survived his mother's latest tyrannical episode without losing his allowance, while Brittany was already mentally redecorating the massive mansion to suit her expensive tastes. Brittany lounged on the plush velvet sofa in the grand living room, scrolling through high-end interior design catalogs on her tablet. She was actively ignoring the blatant disrespect Catherine had shown her the night before, convincing herself that once she officially married Spencer and produced the next heir, she would eventually gain control. Spencer was pacing near the massive stone fireplace, holding his phone to his ear. He was trying to arrange a private catering service to deliver an extravagant celebratory lunch, eager to reward himself for his pathetic display of compliance at the hospital. "I don't understand," Spencer muttered into the phone, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Try the Black Amex again. The number is correct." Brittany looked up from her tablet, a faint flicker of annoyance crossing her features. "Is there a problem with the caterer?" Spencer shook his head, holding up a finger to indicate he was still dealing with the vendor. The transaction was declined, he told the person on the other end of the line, his voice rising slightly in frustration. "That is impossible. It's an unrestricted corporate card tied directly to the family trust. There is no limit. Just run it again manually." He waited, tapping his foot impatiently against the hardwood floor. A moment later, his expression shifted from annoyance to deep, genuine bewilderment. "What do you mean the issuing bank blocked the transaction? That makes absolutely no sense. Cancel the order. I will call you back." Spencer ended the call and stared at his phone. He opened his secure banking application, intending to quickly transfer funds from his primary trust account to cover the minor inconvenience. He typed in his credentials and hit the login button. The screen loaded for a fraction of a second before flashing a stark red error message: "Account access restricted. Please contact your financial institution immediately." A cold, uneasy feeling began to settle in the pit of Spencer's stomach. He tried a different account, his personal checking. The same red error message appeared. He tried his secondary savings. Restricted. He grabbed his wallet and pulled out a different credit card, attempting to log into that specific portal. The result was identical. Every single financial artery connecting him to Catherine's massive wealth had been simultaneously and violently severed. "This is ridiculous," Spencer scoffed, trying to mask the rising panic in his voice. Mom must have triggered some sort of security protocol when she authorized the offshore wire transfer for Quinn. The fraud department probably put a temporary freeze on all the linked family accounts. "I'll just call my private wealth manager and have him clear the hold." Brittany set her tablet down on the coffee table, her eyes narrowing as she watched Spencer frantically dial the bank. The luxurious, untouchable reality she had just married into was suddenly showing highly irregular cracks. Spencer paced the length of the living room, listening to the automated holding music. Finally, his wealth manager answered. The man's voice was completely devoid of its usual sycophantic warmth. It sounded tight-strained and highly professional. "David, what the hell is going on with my accounts?" Spencer demanded, projecting a false bravado he absolutely did not feel. "Every single card I have is declining, and I am locked out of the trust portal. Fix it right now." "Spencer," the wealth manager replied, his voice deadly serious. "I cannot fix it. I cannot even access your files. The federal government has initiated a sweeping asset freeze on the entire holding company and all affiliated trusts." Spencer stopped pacing. The heavy, ornate living room suddenly felt entirely devoid of oxygen. "Federal government? What are you talking about?" My mother just initiated a private offshore transfer. It was a personal transaction. The wealth manager let out a long, ragged sigh. It wasn't a personal transaction, Spencer. It triggered a massive anti-money laundering alert. The Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI are currently raiding your mother's corporate headquarters. They are seizing hard drives and arresting executives. Your mother is currently in federal custody. The allegation is massive institutional embezzlement of employee pension funds. Every single dollar tied to her name, including your entire trust fund, has been liquidated and frozen pending a federal criminal investigation. You have absolutely nothing. The phone slipped from Spencer's hand, clattering against the hardwood floor. The screen cracked, but he didn't notice. He stood completely frozen, his eyes wide and vacant, staring at the wall. The vast, impenetrable safety net he had relied on for his entire 36 years of existence had just been vaporized in a matter of seconds. He was not a billionaire heir anymore. He was a penniless accessory to massive federal fraud. Spencer Brittany asked, her voice sharp and demanding. Her intuition, honed by years of ruthless social climbing, sensed the catastrophic shift in the atmosphere. What is going on? Why did you drop the phone? Spencer slowly turned to face her. His face was the color of dirty snow. My mother has been arrested. He whispered, the words sounding foreign and impossible in his mouth. The FBI raided the company. They froze everything. The accounts, the trust fund, the credit cards. It is all gone. Brittany stared at him, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the armrests of the velvet sofa. Gone. What do you mean, gone? She is a billionaire. You don't just freeze billions of dollars. They do when the money was stolen from federal pension funds. Spencer croaked, his knees finally giving out. He collapsed into a nearby armchair, burying his face in his hands. Quinn didn't just take the money. She set a trap. She exposed everything. We are completely bankrupt, Brittany. I don't even have enough liquid cash to pay the electric bill for this house. Brittany stood up slowly. The luxurious, soft demeanor she had cultivated entirely vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating survival instinct of a woman who realizes she has just boarded a sinking ship. She looked around the grand living room, no longer seeing a palace she would rule, but a massive financial liability she was about to be trapped in. You're broke, Brittany stated, her voice devoid of any warmth, any affection, any trace of the grand romance she had faked for months. Brittany, please, Spencer begged, looking up at her with pathetic, tear-filled eyes. We can figure this out. I can hire lawyers. We can fight this. We are having a baby together. We love each other. Love. Brittany scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the vast room. I loved the lifestyle, Spencer. I loved the trust fund. I loved the access to the Chicago elite. Do you honestly think I endured your mother's relentless disrespect and your pathetic, spineless whining because of your charming personality? You are a 36-year-old child who has never paid a bill in his life. And now you are a broke 36-year-old child facing federal fraud charges. She turned on her heel and marched straight toward the grand staircase. Spencer scrambled to his feet, stumbling after her, desperate and panicked. Where are you going? He cried, grabbing her arm. You can't just leave me. Brittany yanked her arm out of his grasp with violent force. Watch me. I am going upstairs to pack every single designer item your mother bought me. And then I am calling my assistant to come pick me up. I am not going down with this ship, Spencer. I am going to find a good lawyer, terminate this pregnancy, and pretend I never met you. She didn't look back. Spencer stood alone at the bottom of the grand staircase, listening to the sharp, decisive click of her heels retreating down the hallway. The silence of the massive, empty mansion pressed down on him, heavy and absolute. He had betrayed his wife, abandoned his children, and surrendered his dignity to a tyrant, all to protect a fortune that didn't even exist anymore. He was entirely, devastatingly alone. Sunlight warmed the terracotta tiles of the expansive balcony. The air in Geneva was crisp, carrying the pristine metallic scent of snow-capped mountains and deep glacial waters. I sat in a high-backed wicker chair, a steaming cup of dark roast coffee, resting untouched on the glass table beside me. The sprawling majesty of the Swiss Alps rose in the distance, their jagged peaks cutting sharply into a cloudless cerulean sky. It was a view of absolute unassailable safety. Just a few feet away, sheltered beneath the shade of a wide canvas umbrella, Leo and Lily slept peacefully side by side in a custom double bassinet. Their chests rose and fell in perfect synchronized rhythm. They were completely insulated from the catastrophic corporate warfare that had funded their sanctuary. The transition had been flawless, ending at a heavily guarded pediatric clinic overlooking Lake Geneva. Within 48 hours, the world I left behind in Chicago had been entirely incinerated. The global news cycle was dominated by the spectacular, humiliating collapse of Catherine's real estate dynasty. I had watched the live broadcast on a muted television in my suite, federal agents marching my former mother-in-law out of her flagship commercial tower in handcuffs, the news anchors detailing the massive, unprecedented seizure of corporate assets. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the Internal Revenue Service, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation had moved with terrifying coordinated precision. Catherine's empire was currently being dismantled, audited, and sold off for scrap to compensate the thousands of employees she had so arrogantly robbed. The blind trust remained perfectly intact, shielded by impenetrable Swiss banking laws. The 51% controlling stake was safely liquidated through a series of complex automated proxy sales I had initiated mid-flight. The sudden harsh vibration of a cheap plastic burner phone shattered the serene, alpine quiet. It sat on the glass table next to my coffee mug, buzzing aggressively. It was the only tether left connecting me to the burning wreckage of my past life. I had purchased the prepaid device at a kiosk near the Geneva clinic, sending a single untraceable text message to Spencer containing the temporary number. I wanted to hear the final crash. I wanted to witness the exact moment the realization of his absolute ruin finally crushed him. I picked up the small plastic phone, swiped the screen to accept the call, and raised the receiver to my ear. I did not say a single word. I simply let the line open. Quinn Spencer sobbed, his voice cracking with a pathetic, high-pitched hysteria that sounded entirely foreign to the arrogant heir I had married. "Quinn, please, you have to help me. I am begging you. I have absolutely nothing left." The sound of his frantic weeping was sharp and chaotic. He was hyperventilating, struggling to force the words past the sheer terror gripping his throat. The federal agents took everything. They seized the mansion. They froze every single bank account. They even impounded the cars. Mom is sitting in a federal holding facility right now. They denied her bail. Her lawyers are saying she is facing 20 years in federal prison for the pension embezzlement. 20 years, Quinn. She will die in there. I kept my breathing slow and even, listening to the destruction with total chilling detachment. Spencer gasped for air, his panic accelerating. "Brittany left me," he wailed, the betrayal fresh and agonizing in his voice. "She packed her bags the second the credit cards declined. She walked out of the house and told me to pretend she never existed. I am standing on the street outside the estate. The bank foreclosed on the property an hour ago. I do not have $1 to my name. I cannot pay for a hotel. I cannot buy food. My trust fund is completely gone. You control the blind trust. You have the money. Please, Quinn. I am your husband. I am the father of your children. You cannot just leave me here to rot." His desperate, pathetic pleading washed over me, completely failing to elicit a single ounce of sympathy. The man begging for his life on the other end of the line was the same man who had stood silently by while his mother threatened to lock me in a psychiatric ward. He was the man who had held his pregnant mistress's hand while handing me an eviction notice from my own family. He had traded his loyalty for an allowance, and now that the allowance was gone, he expected me to rescue him from the consequences of his own profound cowardice. I let the silence stretch out, allowing the heavy weight of his absolute isolation to press down on him. When I finally spoke, my voice was a flat, lethal blade cutting through the crisp mountain air. "I told you both," I said softly, every syllable measured and precise. You did not have enough money to buy my children. A choked, panicked gasp echoed through the receiver as the absolute finality of my tone registered in his mind. Thank you for the $33 million startup capital. I pulled the phone away from my ear, cutting off his frantic, screaming protests. I pressed the end call button, plunging the device into total silence. With calm, deliberate movements, I popped the plastic back cover off the cheap phone. I slid the tiny metallic SIM card out of its slot. I pinched the small piece of plastic and metal between my thumb and forefinger and snapped it cleanly in half. I tossed the broken pieces into a small decorative planter resting on the balcony railing, burying them deep beneath the dark, fertile soil. The last fragile bridge to Chicago was permanently severed. I turned my attention back to the spectacular view. The sun was climbing higher into the cloudless sky, casting brilliant golden light across the jagged snow-capped peaks of the Alps. I walked over to the custom bassinet and looked down at my sleeping twins. Leo shifted slightly, letting out a soft, contented sigh. Lily remained perfectly still, her tiny chest rising and falling with peaceful, uninterrupted grace. They would never know the toxic, controlling dynasty that had tried to claim them. They would never meet the cowardly man who had tried to sell them out. They were safe, sheltered behind a fortress of impenetrable financial architecture and international borders. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold, crisp mountain air. My physical wounds were healing. My enemies were entirely ruined. My children were absolutely secure. My empire had just begun.